Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 9:14. We're running late, but that's okay. I think we can work this. We're hoping others would show up. But the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation now convenes this public hearing. Public hearing notices were given to the media on first notice on Wednesday, February 28th, 2018. Second notice on Friday, March 2nd, 2018. For the record, today is Thursday, March 8th. And the time is 9:15. Committee will hear and accept testimonies, both oral and written, on the following. Bill number 248-L4, introduced by myself, an act to add a new Article 7 to Chapter 26 of Title 11, Guam Code Annotated, relative to imposing a general sales tax on Guam, and to dedicating the revenue to be collected from the expanded revenue stream to Guam Memorial Hospital for its operation and modernization, the Department of Education to fund its capital needs, and the general fund of the Government of Guam to address the tax-based erosion resulting from the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts of 2017. Also, Bill 249-34, introduced by Senator Fernando Esteves, an act to add Chapter 27 to establishing Title 11 of Guam Code Annotated relative to establishing a general sales tax. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues. From my far left would be Senator Tommy Morrison, Senator Esteves. We have Senator Castro. To my immediate right is Senator San Nicolas, and then Senator Frank Uggan. The conduct of this public hearing shall be as follows. Those testifying will be recognized in the order of the sign-up on the sign-in sheet. Written testimony may be read. Lengthy testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes. We'll allow additional time if you need. Written testimony should be submitted to the committee. Please provide our legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimony shall be confined to the substance. Persons will be allowed to present oral testimony only once. Once you are done, you may be asked to remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony, as may be desired by the panels of the members of the panel. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Then you state your name for the record. We will now hear. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation of Bill 248 and by myself and assisted by Carlos Camacho from the private sector. We'll present Bill 248, and then Senator Esteves will be allowed to present 249, so that when I ask the folks that want to testify, when they come up, already the two bills were presented, and you can state your piece. Okay? Thank you. I'd ask Mr. Camacho, if you please join us up here on the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, what we presented is a PowerPoint presentation about Bill 248 and what the impact is and what we hope to generate, what we expect to generate, and where the funds will go. And we'll identify the source of where we got the information and how we put it together. Okay? We'll have the... yeah, right before that. Okay. They got some nice pictures before that, so we'll get to the meat of it. Next. See? All right. We're going to start with number one. Part of Bill 248 talks about our source data. We'll start with first the Government of Guam's Continuing Disclosure Annual Report. The next slide. You'll find that what we did was we took a snapshot of basically what's in the continuing report, and we identified the sectors. Mr. Camacho. Press the mic.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, thank you. My name is Carlos Camacho. I'm from the private sector. I was watching this scenario for the last 3 weeks, and Senator San Agustin had asked if we could come in and how we could put and enhance his sales tax approach. And I know Senator Esteves has one too, so hopefully when you guys hybrid these together, you guys will have one product that would help out this government and DOE. But to go back to the presentation, like the chairman said, we wanted first to cite a source so that way when we present our financial pro forma, it's coming from a credible source on our database, our financial data. So one of the sources mentioned came from the Government of Guam disclosure statement from a bond document that's established when they go out for the bond market. And this is for the BPT bonds that was floated in 2015. So the latest BPT audited cash flow we had is FY 2016. So our basis of this pro forma would be based on the audited FY 2016. There are 6 sectors that the cash flow generates. And those sectors, as you can see, is from retailing all the way down to other. That generates annually on BPT revenue of $234 million. And that's the basis of our presentation later on. Next slide, please. In addition, we also took the S&P Global Rating document that we found, again, through our research. And when we're doing this presentation, there are 2 things in that bullet that we want to make sure that we're within those guidelines. One is that we all know that 3 of the 4% BPT is securitized for bond covenants. And right now, based on 2016, that averages of $179 million that we got to make sure that we don't, whenever there are tax changes, either through BPT or if you're going to shift all the way to a sales tax, we got to make sure that the BPT levels are protected for now until such time that GITA, and if there's a historical data on sales tax, that they can work with the bond community and say we'll convert, but that's not going to happen overnight. So for now, our presentation is a hybrid 4%, 2% scenario, so we can protect bullet number 1 on the S&P Global Rating, that the 3 or 4% is not hampered or modified. Second, on bullet number 9, it's projected that a growth rate on Guam, because of the buildup and other factions, that Guam growth rate will be 4%. In our pro forma, we were very conservative. We use a 2% growth rate. So we can see where the 2% growth rate would take us, projecting from 2016 all the way up to 2024. So this is a supporting document that we use as our basis before we went on to do the pro forma. Next slide, please. What's important to also understand is when you guys deliberate the taxes for our community, what a lot of people are not familiar with, all they're hearing is taxes, taxes, taxes. But it is correct, the Tax Reform Act did shift the loss of revenues from the taxes. I'm not going to talk about the corporate taxes. I'm only going to provide a tax comparison for individual taxes, because that's the homeowner, the husband and wife, the Mr. and Mrs. John Cruz, that are going to feel these tax burden that's been proposed by whichever product is accepted by the body. So I want to show you where there are potential, the tax savings and the tax cut rate just for individuals and married couple. Next slide, please. So in 2017, prior to the Tax Reform Act, we had a tax level structure from 10% all up to 39.6%. And as you can see, there's different income thresholds from $9,000 all up to $470,000. And from that threshold, that's the left column. In the past, before the Tax Reform Act, that's the full value this government used to control when taxes are paid based on the tax rate. The governor and the legislature controls that revenue source. Well, guess what happened? 2018 came, Congress and the Senate passed the Tax Reform Act. Well, it shifted everything to the right. The majority of the savings is average of 3% down the line. There's some that are stable, like the 10%, and we can explain that later in an analogy, because those are the guys in the 10% stable income have those other extra tax benefits. Extra benefits, I don't have time to put in the slides, but I'm just going to show an exercise on the tax cut rate on the median income families and the effect on the cost of goods and all the other costs that they're going to bear with in the event you guys do pass a sales tax. Next slide. It's hard to see this, but the other thing we did was out of the 63,000 tax filers in Guam, I broke down the filers into groups of the tax rate. And if you look at the top 3 tax level rates, over 70%, if you add those percentages in the right column, and you guys have that in your sheet, over 60%, I mean, meet the 10 to 20% tax bracket. That's the one where there's an average of 3% tax cut rate savings. So the rest on the bottom are the higher income folks in Guam that also got some tax benefits, but in today's case study analysis, I'm only going to use the moderate income community, because that's the average family who is a tabletop discussion. Goes, hey, they're raising the taxes on me. The guys below that, I think they make enough money to absorb this tax rate based on the tax table, $500,000 and up. But I'm going to focus on the top 3 tier, which is the moderate to low income community that got a 3% tax cut rate. Next slide.
Now, before he speaks on the next slide, please understand that on the very top, where they have there's approximately 16,000 folks are zero taxable income. Those are folks that are normally they receive their funds through maybe Social Security, where they're not taxable. They make less than 9,000, and their deduction is higher than what they make. Some folks, they make 12,000 in deduction. There's nothing to tax on them, but they do get a benefit. They do get their refund. They get a refund. Those are the folks that always get refunds. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there's 16,000 filers out there that are zero taxable income. Okay?
Thank you, Senator.
Next, there you go.
So in this case study impact analysis, I decided to look at the 15% tax rate, because that's where the average median income of 50,000. And if you look at the old tax table that we said earlier, 15%, their tax exposure is 7,500. If you look at the new tax rate at the same 50,000 at 12%, their tax estimate exposure is 6,000, thereby providing them a $1,500 positive tax benefit due to the Tax Reform Act. Now, bear in mind, this is conservative because we did not layer in yet their other exemptions they get through the tax policy. Like, if you guys know, married couples get from 12 to 24. Double child tax credit went from 1,000 to 2,000. So we didn't have time to do those individual analogies. So this example is just straightforward on the tax cut, just a tax cut formula. So I just want to make sure it's conservative. So our numbers at 1,500 is a very conservative number. We did not imply, again, those other benefits. Next slide. So before we do our case study, we wanted to get also sources of what the costs of goods are. And in a week when we put this together, we were able to just find researches and article. There's a USDA plan that they did for family of 4. And as of one example, through an August 3, 2017 article in the Pacific Daily News, the total family of 4 food expense a month is about $871. So this is one source we're going to use when I show the impact on the sales tax. So next slide. When I was in the talk show last week, Patty Roy asked me, "Oh, Carl, you're forgetting about the increase of power because of the LEAC rate." So of course I said, okay, I'll add that in the slide. Let's add the power costs. And according to this article, the average power hit per family is additional $12 per utility bill. So I said, okay, why don't we include that so we can just see what the combined total impact would be with the sales tax to see if we're really having a negative cash flow for the families. So we decided to add power bills on the $12 additional per household. Next slide. We also, next slide, yeah. We also wanted to add the GWA rate increase that they're affecting in 2018. And they're doing a $2 increase average per residential customer per month. So we wanted to add that into the layer of this annual impact of additional costs to the families. Next slide. So bear in mind, I only used 3 variables, which is the cost of food, utilities, and all that. Of course, there are other expenses in the community, But if you look under the line item 2 called other expenses, we decide to throw in another average $400. That's where the families decide to choose their wish. If they want to go to the movies, go out to dinner, do a little shopping. So they budget a $400 budget for that. So if you take the 871, I'm looking at 2018 now, and if you went out up to 2024, I did a 2% inflationary rate compound down the board. So from 871, it went up to 980. But let's just use one table for now, just for the exercise, 2018, if you can look at that. You take 871 as stated on that news article. You take 400 as if the families decide to go out on their own and to restaurants and movies and shopping a little for whatever they need and Macy's or Kmart, that kind of stuff. The 2% sales tax impact is $25.42 to that value. Then if you add the average GPA-LEAC increase of $12 and the GW increase of $2, if you add those times 12, the total annual impact is $473 combined with the 2% sales tax. Then if you minus that with the Tax Reform Act benefit that the homeowner receive or the family tax filer receive of $1,500, as I said, that's very conservative. That provides a net positive tax benefit of $1,026.
Now, gentlemen, just keep in mind, I know you're probably looking at it that nobody's just getting a $12 increase. There's a lot more you're going to be paying a month. But everybody's also been conserving the amount of power they use because they don't want to continue paying. But if you also look at what they say, the net positive tax benefit, there's money there from the Trump Act. And the same thing applies with the GWA. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Senator. So just in this one exercise on one target income of $50,000, I did the same exercise, a 40,000 family, but I'm using a 50, but you guys can use this formula and find out what a $40,000 family will have an impact. It still have a net positive tax benefit. So all we're saying here is that since we shifted the tax cut rate from left, what you guys used to be controlled when it used to be prior to the Tax Reform Act, now it's shifted to the homeowner and the families. And even though it's estimated at 871 and 400, because the 12 and the 2 we don't control, that's controlled by the PUC and the utilities, raising those based on their needs. I think by shifting that savings to the family, they can conserve and do their own food cost conservation program. They can look at other expenses and decide if that's what they want to spend. But at the end of the day, it looks like all we're touching when you do the 2% sales tax is only the benefit they receive. You're not touching their base pay. That's very key to know. That the family, we're not touching their base pay. We're touching the benefits they receive from the Tax Reform Act based on this exercise. Next slide. Now we're going to go in and say, how do we come up with that number that you, the body, needs to see if it is sufficient to cover the government shortfall and to also assure, like I said in the previous bullet, that we don't affect the BPT 3 to 4% ratio so we don't violate the bond covenants. We're going to start with the 2016 cash flow and then project forward from 2017 to 2024. So this stuff, this 2016, as you know, the source came from the Government of Guam Continuing Disclosure Annual Report as of FY 2016. I know we finished 2017, but we haven't got the audited BPT revenue data. But I think when we added the year-to-date, our 2017 was very close to what the unaudited amount came in. So just so you know that this is the data we're using henceforth on our pro forma that we're going to show how we came up with what the 2% can yield. Next slide. So starting from 2017 base year, in the top of a 2% growth rate, again, the S&P mentions a 4% growth assumption. We decided to use a 2% growth assumption, henceforth from 2017 up to 2024. The reason we stopped at 2024, as we all know, the Tax Trump Act expires in 2025. So this provides us a cash flow pro forma up to 2024. And from there, whoever's in the legislature, or the governor's seat, or in Congress, they don't know if they're going to extend it or not, but it expires in 2025. And we may revert back to the old tax rate, and then it's up to, at that point, the body, whoever that may be, to reverse these tax hikes. But So our pro forma is only up to 2024 because of that reason, because of the expiration of the Tax Reform Act.
Also to mention that, I think from Gita, they advised us that in 2025, most of the bonds will have been paid off. Or a big portion would have been paid off. Am I correct? Oh, it can be refinanced then. Okay, that's even better. Thank you.
So this is just showing the pro forma and what the 6 sectors would generate on the total gross sales. Anywhere from 5.9 billion all the way up to 6.8 billion. Next slide. Now here's the hybrid approach. If you look in the top, it's the existing 4% BPT with the same sectors being taxed. And in the bottom, you got the sales tax at 2%. So real important, if you look at the total BPT collection under 2018, assuming the 2% growth rate, again, we're not using the 4, 3 to 4% of that is 178 million. So we are still not in violation of the bond covenants. If you look across the fiscal year up to 2024, we're still within the 3 to 4%, because again, we're not affecting the 4% stable BPT that's presently in the books of the law. So I just want to show that 3% of that is still protected across the board, because the 4% is not adjusted, it's not protected, not deducted, and all that kind of stuff. But most importantly, the sales tax at 2% now. If you applied the 2% to the same sector, which is the retail, service, construction, rentals, insurance, and other, the revenues generated in 2018 would be $121.4 million, and so on and so forth. So
keep in mind, gentlemen, that's the whole year, and we're not at the whole year, so you would take that and split that in half. All right?
Yeah, so basically that's, again, so how we got 121 is from a baseline of 2016's BPT data. So numbers came from an original foundation that is audited, or numbers that's been used in the 2015 bond market abstract. Next. Now, this is the stuff we talked with the Senator in Bill 248 when there was a 2% allocation, right, based on, assuming we have a full year, but we all know it's only half the year left, but assuming it's a full year, if this was done prior to the fiscal year, that 0.75, 0.25, and the 1% to government would generate, based on the 121, would generate 45 million to GMH, 15 million to GDOE, 60 million to government operation. That's based on his existing bill, but the body, and he said he will make a recommendation to change that, because now we only got the remaining 6 months left or whatever when this stuff gets enacted, and you guys will have to appropriate accordingly to the remaining fiscal year. But that's the body's call, and this is just showing, assuming it's a full year. Next slide. Next slide. So there again, so if you look at the same table we did, assuming the sales tax is effective on April to September, then it would only generate $60 million on revenue. And how we got that is if you take the 121.4 million divided by 12 months, that brings in the $10 million a month on new sales tax. But because we can't account for the other 6 months, only the remaining 6 months, it only brings in 60 million. So if you look at the lockbox category below it, GMH, government operation, and in government operation, that includes GDOE, so we didn't break it down to the 3 categories. That will be up to this body to say, how do we want to distribute the 60 million to cover those shortfall. But 60 million came from the remaining fiscal year, if assuming this is effective April. Senator, any questions on that? In 2019, that's the new year, it brought in 123 million. And if you fully fund then, the full year now, if you fully fund the hospital at 30 million, and you provide the 70 million to government operation, again, that includes a DOE portion, you would have a surplus of $20-some million that is available from the 2% tax yield, tax sales. And the senator wanted to His suggestion, of course, he's just one of the 15. His suggestion is to use those $24 million surplus, if it is being realized, to those 6 lockbox category. And those lockbox category are, when you imply a sales tax, and it will show on the next slide, under federal law, OSNAP revenues, OSNAP food program, that I think maybe Senator Davis would probably like this, because this would probably answer your question about the different type of food items. OSNAP cannot be taxed sales tax. And that's why one of the line item, we created a 2.2072 lifeline rate, or take it away from the cash flow. So we know that that's covered the SNAP exemption. We also, the senator decided to put a value for medicine exemption for pharmaceutical for certain seniors and low income. He also provided to put a, and I'm sorry, I can't read it from up there, so let me just go back to my...
Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be identifying also funding to provide to public health for the MIP, or if it's Medicare, matching funds, because one of the problems they're faced with is that if they don't have any local money, if we can give them $3 million, they'll get 7. They get to draw down. So those are the things we're actually eyeing out, because that's how we can help the people of Guam that need that assistance. And
the other thing, since the sales tax is going to yield a $24 million surplus, assuming, he wanted to make sure the other community members and community benefit from the tax benefit, or from the tax increase. One of the ideas he brought up was the village street lights and secondary, tertiary road. Right now, we all know you guys are budgeting about $6 million to a cash flow, and every village is asking for more streetlights because of the safety issue, but there's not enough money. So he wants to allocate a X amount of dollars from that surplus, so that the rest of the community who's contributing in this tax can say, I also benefit through the streetlight. And one of the things he loves that he mentioned was this G4S model in Tuman. If the tourists can get security guards, private security guards in Tuman, I would like to take some of the surplus and utilize all the police co-bonds in the village and privatize those security guards in our village with this funding source. Again, this is just an idea, because it takes the other 14 to reappropriate those surplus to whatever you guys think is best for this community. But this is just some of the idea. And then, of course, he threw in GPD and GFD, an additional $2 million each per year in this cash flow. Again, this is the senator's wish list when he put it together, but there's actually him plus 14 of you guys will make that call. Assuming this number is correct after you guys solve GMH and the government shortfall for the next fiscal year. Next slide.
Before we go to the next slide, just to let you know, we also identified a funding mechanism. You know, there's been a lot of talk that in Saipan, how they collect the internet sales to the postal is to provide funding to customs so they can build like a clearinghouse, not on the postal, because you can't impede mail, but you can build it right next door. And the Guam main facility is the main hub where all the mail goes through. If I'm correct, I think adjacent to that is government property. Provide that funding so that Guam Customs can build a building, and they have an MOU they're trying to work out right now with the Postal Service, so that when anything comes in, it's moved over to the, and for the folks to pick up their mail that's bulk in boxes, they would have to go to the clearinghouse, and then they get tagged for the user's fee that we need to start collecting. That I know, Mr. Camacho, we brought that up about trying to get and try to close that loop and try to catch all those user fees that we need to collect.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, that's one of the line items he budgeted to provide financial resources for customs to build a capital asset at a post office. Under the Saipan model, under the federal USPS law, you cannot have the clearinghouse inside a federal building. So what Saipan did is they built a facility connected to it, because it's government land, and they funnel the families or receivers to the clearinghouse, and then they can attach the user fee tax based on that. So we wanted to make sure there's a financial resources, so when customs decide to look at a property up at GMF area and build it, then that's a revenue that you guys can capture that is not being taxed. And the good news is Saipan's using it now. We can use that as a case study and how Saipan did it. Just Same USPS, same government. We just have to borrow their model. Sorry, I forgot to mention. Thank you, Senator. Next. So the question is, how did you know what SNAP benefit is, and how do you know what the exemption amount is? Thanks to Public Health and Senator's Office, Guam annually for 2017 received 103.6 million in SNAP benefits. Under the federal guidelines under sales tax, SNAP benefits cannot be taxed as sales tax. So that's every food expense under SNAP. So at $103 million, and we know that value because that's what's coming into Guam, we did a 2% sales tax. So that's the exemption value that we're going to lose from that $121 million cash flow. Because the cash flow already yielded the 121, but you got to take out the $2 million, and we got the $2 million because there is a value being appropriated, 103. And that, the last 2 years, you guys got that in your budget bill. It shows what SNAP comes in. It's averaging about 101, 102, this year 103. And so that's the number we're using. We're using the 2017 SNAP value. Next. Most importantly, why is sales tax versus a BPT? Sales tax potentially, as I've been hearing in the public hearing through Senator Esteves and other members on this body, that if we don't have a sales tax, there's no mechanism for us to generate a sales tax with Amazon.com and all the other internet sales that we don't even know what that value is, where Guam's buying power is going out. But if we have a sales tax, and then we have the infrastructure to be part of that sales tax industry through the internet community. Here's the beauty about that, and it's not here because it's just too much information. Guam has to be part of, and it's in Senator Stevens' bill, Guam has to be part of the Nexus Agreement in order for us to tax the Amazon and all that. But not only that, there's an existing bill in Congress called the Fair Market Fairness Act. The Senate had passed that already, and the House is waiting to vote. Madeline Berdal's office is aware of that, and she's aware that she's going to include, I don't know yet where they're at in that, but she's aware, because they contact the Senator's office, that what's happening is there's 26 billion of internet sales activity in the U.S., and they're not reporting it correctly to the state and county. So this Fair Market Fairness Act is a bill that would have a federal reporting mechanism to that state or county, or in this case, the territory. So we just want to make sure that where Guam's included in that, if it does benefit us under the internet sales. So that is a loss, that is a potential revenue generator, as we said in the user fee and the postal service, that once we know that kind of cash flow, then maybe the body can, in 2 years when we have historical data, can decide to roll back some taxes because we're finally taxing things that we didn't tax.
Now, staying within the internet, I know that some of my colleagues have asked, have you reached out to the some of the prominent tax accountants out here? We did reach out to Mr. Jornet, Bob Steffi, even our attorney for the tax commission, Mr. Larry Baruch. And when we identified internet sales, we told them that we probably estimate maybe 12 or 16 million we can collect. And the first thing they said was that that's too low. They estimate that based on the sales that is going on in the nation and also Guam, you could probably go over $20 million of internet sales that we haven't been able to grab it. So this would allow us that opportunity.
Yes. And I tend not to be an expert. This is the senator's staff that decide to look at this. QC holders, presently they have, not all of them, but presently they have a three-legged QC benefit. They have the 100% rebate in real property, 75% corporate rebate, and some of them have a BPT rebate, some of them, not all. So if a sales tax is implemented, the QC holders agreement can still stand in place. We're not going to cancel that. They will still get the benefit, because remember, this is a hybrid of 4+2. They will still get their benefit on the 4% portion, but on the 2% portion, I don't know what the mechanism is, but at least on the 2%, for those that are exempted on the QC, will contribute now on the sales tax on the 2%. So that will bring in some dollar value, but I'm not sure what that is. But that's just an idea, but that's where the legal guys and you guys will have to research and look at that with GITA to make sure it doesn't violate their QC agreement. And next, that should be it, I think. Next slide, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. I like to keep everybody just reminded that during our sessions, Senator Spadon did bring up that if we maintain that was that the 30-minute, 37 that we were talking about, that the government continues to reduce because of the amount of time left to raise money, we can make it to September. Then the following year, this is where we start generating more money and it starts to fix itself. And then we start to take care of the whole government and all the people who want. Now we will start with, before we ask anybody to ask any question, we'll ask Senator Esteves, I'd like you to do your presentation or any introduction on Bill 249. And then I would ask the folks to come forward to give testimony. Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Bill 249-3S applies a general sales tax to the government code. The key difference between our proposals is Bill 249 proposes a tax on the retail industries and insurance premiums specifically. What Bill 249 doesn't do is apply a sales tax to other industries as highlighted in the previous presentation, such as service, construction, and rental, primarily. And my reasoning for this, Mr. Chairman, is to prevent inflation from increasing by retailers and other service-based industries having to use that multiplier effect. So with the general provision of a tax increase across the board, you see that 2% across the board with many businesses. As their expenses go up, their prices go up, and that ends to a more than 2% pure increase on the end item or end service to the consumer. Another primary reason for the exemptions, Mr. Chairman, highlighted in 249 is to prevent the cost of inflation of construction, to prevent any hampering of putting people into homes, as well as rentals. So if we look at exempting services, then we look at an overall protection mechanism to prevent the increase of rentals for our low-income earners. Now, what we also do on the retail side is provide exemptions for food items. So as previously stated in Bill 249, there currently is the exemption for SNAP, and there are also exemptions for those not on SNAP with a wide and general array of food items. Some other provisions of exemptions, without going into all of them, Mr. Chairman, are exemptions on baby food and products, as well as prescription medication. And this is so that even if we're applying an increase, Mr. Chairman, in taxes, that it has a reduced impact to the economy. One other provision is that home purchases under the value of $500,000 are exempt from a sales tax as well. Mr. Chairman, I've gotten feedback on the internet sales with people trying to understand why we propose a 6% internet sales. Currently in our books, there's a 4% use tax assessed that should be assessed on internet sales. So what we did under section 27105 is explicitly state and make the language very simple. Anything that applies to taxation under retail will be exempt from the use tax and the sales tax and will be a pure and easy to understand flat 6% sales tax, which takes into account the 4% use tax and the 2% sales tax, which would otherwise already apply. But we wanted to make it very clear and transparent in this bill and make the language very explicit so that if we do look at nexus vendor agreement models to have internet vendors collect the sales tax as they do for other states on our behalf, then it would be an easy agreement because it would be very clear language. Mr. Chairman, one final point is a lot of this language was taken in current statute, and that's on the administration aspect. And the reason we did this, to put the administration of this tax, is because we know that with the BPT, there are currently systems in place within revenue and taxations for the collection of BPTs. This makes for, and after discussions with revenue and taxation, this makes for an easy transition on the government side for the actual collection, minus the creation of forms and the eventual upgrade to online filing of sales tax and reporting and returns. The most difficult portion we're going to have with this sales tax and any other sales tax is really going to be working with the retailer and the vendors and service-based industries on how they apply it when they file their returns. And then the last reason for ensuring that our language is consistent with current statute is that when we look at applying and transitioning fully from a BPT to a sales tax, that the language is consistent and we won't have to go in too much and alter the language with regards to the administration of these taxes when we do the conversion to a sales tax, if we do a conversion to a sales tax. Thank you for the opportunity to present my bill, and thank you for people coming out to testify, and I look forward to hearing the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I will now call out the gentlemen or ladies that have signed up. We'll start with, just going down the list here. We have, could you be testifying for or against either bill? We have Mr. Ken Leonguero, if you can please come forward. We have Mr. Sidfree Lensangan, sir. We have, I know that Mr. Carlson was here, but he had to take off for an emergency. We have Mr. Burns. We have Senator Klitsky, sir. Just counting the number of seats up there. We have Mr. Rojas from Gita. We have Mr. Phil Flores. I just want to see how many chairs we got left. We have Peter John Camacho, Mr. Camacho. We have Mr. Fernandez. And then we have Mr. Salas, Walter Salas. Is he here? Mr. Minjol, please join us also. Just squeeze in where John's at, where Mr. John Fernandez and yourself, yeah. I know we have enough chairs, right? We have 2. We normally would start with the first one that signed up because we have, and we're honored to have the presence of Senator Klitsky, we're going to have you start first, Senator Klitsky, and then I know that Ken doesn't mind. And then we'll just go down the line, and we'll work it. Senator Klitsky, please, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am Robert Klitsky. I'm here to testify against both bills, but with a couple policy changes and some technical corrections, either of the bills might gain my support. Your performing the Missouri maneuver is absolutely essential if you are to gain my support for these or any other tax increases. Now, those fortunate senators who were here yesterday for the main event know what I'm talking about when I mentioned the Missouri maneuver. And I suppose, in fairness to all and sundry, I should probably read my entire testimony from yesterday. But maybe I'll just let that go for now. You have a copy in front of you, and if anyone would care for any kind of individual instruction after the hearing, I could probably make myself available. Unless you take steps to fix the structural problems within the government of Guam to bring about an effective, efficient government that provides basic services in accordance with the rule of law, on at least a break-even basis, temporary fixes like a sales tax are abhorrent. Repeating, temporary fixes like a sales tax are abhorrent. So this is kind of like maybe what we don't want to hear anymore. When I say we, I think I'm speaking for a lot of people out there in TV land. This is not what I want to hear. Well, let's get through this cash emergency and then we'll work on long-term solutions. I've heard that one so many times. And we get through the temporary emergency and that's it. We're right back to business as usual. So that slogan won't cut it anymore. The long term and the short term must be dealt with apace, not seriatim. Tie the tax increase, as per below, to the provisions of Bill 247, which was the bill that was heard yesterday. That's the Government Priorities Act. Again, a copy is attached for your easy reading. And you will have performed the Missouri Maneuver. Now, what the Missouri Maneuver means is that you take the substance of that bill and attach it to either of these bills, the one that you want to move forward. And of course, that does require a little bit of parliamentary acrobatics, but the script is in the bill, is in my testimony here. Tie the tax increase, as per described below, to the provisions of Bill 247, and you will then have performed the Missouri Maneuver. As indicated in my March 7 testimony, parliamentary acrobatics and the use of Standing Rule 4.02 can get you past the stricture of 6.01A1. Do it, and I'll nominate you all, or since it's Missouri, maybe it's y'all, for honorary citizens of Missouri. A bill with a close at hand sunset provision imposing a 1% sales tax on Guam-only sales that incorporates the provisions of Bill 247, passing muster with Part 2 below, would get my support and the gigantic block of supporters that I command. And I emphasize the word Guam sales. Now, I don't think there's anybody in this room that remembers when we first put a use tax in place back in the 60s. When that happened, the U.S. Post Office would notify Guam Customs, and a customs inspector would come over to the post office. You would get your package at the window. The customs inspector would look at that package and assess whatever tax was payable. That tax is still on the books. That use tax is still on the books. So I don't know if we really need to revisit that here. Taxing internet sales is an extremely complicated matter, perhaps best to a standalone bill. I mentioned later, I'll get to it later on, but simply put, when you're dealing with large companies like Amazon, which has probably got a larger revenue take than all but 20 countries in the world, we aren't really the front of their marketing effort. We are potentially a very small tail attempting to wag a very large dog. So I would suggest great care in attempting to tax internet sales. Technical corrections, I've listed several sections there in each bill that define and attempt to assign duties to the Department of Revenue and Taxation. A department is not a juridical entity. It's incapable of fulfilling any duty. Therefore, assignment of duties to the, quote, department of anything is anomalous. The Director of Revenue and Taxation, a natural person appointed by and holding a commission from the governor, is appropriate. Section 2 of Bill 248 uses language so loosely drawn as to place no restriction on the expenditure of revenue collected pursuant to the tax imposed. Carefully drafted language establishing at least restricted segregated accounts and reporting requirements could be considered. Section 4 of 248 is superfluous as it only restates the command of 1 GCA Section 102A, which says that a bill is effective at midnight the day it's signed. Also has some qualifications for vetoes, etc. As written, Bill 248 requires that businesses must begin collecting the tax no later than 12:01 a.m. on the day after the governor signs. That effective date even precedes the rules required in the bill. It's chaos. 249 has a pretty short fuse, 30 days. It seemed like that would be a very short period of time for businesses to set up the necessary mechanisms to segregate that which is taxable from that which is not taxable. We're all used to going to Payless now, loading up the card, coming to the cash register, cashing it all out. Wouldn't work anymore. Cashing out your groceries would be a somewhat complicated process. I don't know if 30 days is long enough. I have a feeling that someone else who's here to testify may have his own views of that, so I'll just stop there. Sections 5 and 4, respectively, are the habitual severability clauses that find their way into even bills containing only one sentence. This section is unnecessary. Given the compact purposes of these bills, the logic of acquiescing and severing any of the parts is hard to discern. Wouldn't the purpose of the bill be served only if the entire bill endures judicial challenge? Now, I do mention that Note 8 here, my number 8, does have a bearing on what should or should not be severability because of the potential constitutional problems there. Other than the last 3 sections of Bill 248, which are superfluous anyhow, what provision, if properly drafted, could be severed without changing the purpose of the bill and cause you not to support it? South Dakota versus Wayfair, Inc. Pens before the United States Supreme Court right now, and that's a bill, or excuse me, that's a case that deals with a South Dakota law attempting to tax internet sales. And the reason that South Dakota versus Wayfair is before the United States Supreme Court right now is because the Supreme Court of South Dakota said that the South Dakota law was unconstitutional as violative of the Commerce Clause. Bringing me back again to the point that taxing internet sales, unless we just stick with a use tax that's already on the books, a pretty complicated matter and might be better reserved to a standalone bill that attempted only that taxation and nothing else. Then I could come down and just testify against that and not everything else for a change. Until the U.S. Supreme Court rules, best to leave internet sales for another day. In closing, a bill with a close-at-hand sunset provision imposing a 1% sales tax that incorporates the provisions of Bill 247, passing muster with my Part 2 above, would get my support. As they say in Missouri, show me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We will now, Jay, we'll jump to the first one that signed up. And Mr. Ken, and then Mr. Sidfree, is he? Well, when you're done, we'll go down the line and I'll call the names out, okay?
Thank you very much. My name is Ken Leon Guerrero. I'm with the Guam Citizens for Public Accountability. We support the concepts behind Bill 248 because we have to start somewhere. But I'm going to follow former Senator Klitsky's path to yesterday. Yesterday was a hearing on a bill to reorganize the government to make it smaller and more efficient. There was only one government official there. Today we're here at a hearing for bills to increase taxes on a population already struggling to survive from paycheck to paycheck, and we have government officials dropping out of the sky to testify on this one. So I just make that observation, and here's why. For decades, we've avoided delinking from the U.S. IRS code because in the eyes of our policymakers, juggling tax policy was too complicated and they didn't feel that we were ready to do it. And so that's why that can has been kicked down the road for 4 decades. And now we have a manufactured financial crisis. And I say manufactured because it was man-made. A manufactured crisis, and we are using this manufactured crisis as the compelling reason why we want to jump into a subject that politicians have successfully avoided dealing with for 4 decades, and we're trying to do it overnight. So, from the public's perspective, this is how it looks. Politicians are rushing headlong into this effort to hopefully avoid having to put 11,000 employees, and if you listen to Simon Sanchez and the autonomous agencies, having to put somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 employees now on 32-hour work week. What about the 56,000 employees who are going to have to be paying this tax, many of whom do not have the benefits that the government employees have, many who do not have the job security the government employees have, and many who are working 2 and 3 jobs already trying to survive in this economy? Now, we watch the market basket of goods being displayed. I have some disputes with that because just in the last couple of weeks, I've seen the cost of basic goods I buy on a weekly basis go up almost 25%. And that's without any increases in taxes or anything. So the fact that we're not in a true free market economy means that you guys have to make haste slowly. Bill 248, introducing a sales tax, is a good idea, but like the previous speaker, it needs to be done in conjunction with good faith, verifiable efforts on the part of government to reduce the cost so that taxpayers will feel, okay, there's some sharing here. So instead of closing down 2 fire stations and just merely transferring people around, it would have been more effective for the people if we'd seen a total retraction of the 2014 executive pay raises. Instead of closing down the Hagana police station, we would have been more impressed if we eliminated or canceled all the deputy director positions, because if the directors are doing their job, they supervise the line managers and the different program managers. What do we need deputy directors for? That would have had more credibility for the public, and that goes back to the hearing at 247 yesterday. There are so many things that we could do to reduce our burn rate, if you will. And I say burn rate specifically because in the business world, the burn rate is how fast we are burning money, and that's literally what we're doing. Our concern is that by increasing taxes without in advance reducing the burn rate, we're giving money to a drug addict. We have no proof a drug addict is going to take that money and go pay for rehabilitation. We have no proof that if we increase taxes, there are going to be any sincere, honest efforts to follow through on Bill 247, reduce the cost of government. I say reduce the cost because the way our economy is structured, 48% of our government is 48% of our economy is government expenditures. We can't take a chainsaw to that because any dramatic cut we make, and let's say take head count, let's take 500, 1,000 people and just eliminate them right off the bat, we're going to see corresponding damage in the private economy. So what we have to do is we have to navigate smarter, and tax is a good place to start. I've listened for years how revenue and taxes come before this body and testified. Last time I listened, they had 169 million, I think in 2016, 169 million in uncollected taxes. You guys gave them money to hire people. At the SES, we learned that they're almost hired a year later. So there's no sense of urgency in this government to do the things it should do before it comes to the people and asks us to surrender more of our hard-earned money. If revenue tax is able to come up here and say we've collected 75% of the amount we reported in 2016, that would be a good faith effort. I have a feeling they're not going to be able to do that, though, seeing as how they still haven't hired the people you gave them the money to hire already. So when you come to the people and say, your lives are hard, we understand it, but we want to make your lives just a little bit harder, you're not taking into account the collateral effects, because already our businesses are struggling. They're struggling against the untaxed, massive retail operations at Naval Station and Anderson Air Force Base. Any tax you increase, whether it's business privilege tax or sales tax, is going to drive a large number of people onto those bases. And you know as well as I do that everybody on Guam has a friend or a relative that has a card. Failing that, on people that are already struggling, we're going to see more of those sales go over to the internet. And when I first testified on this subject, I had lots of young people coming up to me telling me that my numbers were low. They're way low. They're buying dog food, they're buying shampoo, they're buying food over the internet. So if we raise these taxes without a corresponding increase in the offsets to the cost of living, such as increasing the minimum wage or reducing the cost of government, so that these tax increases are going to have minimal impact. Today I stopped at McDonald's to have breakfast, and the lady there told me that in her wildest dream she didn't think she would have to get a part-time job after she retired. That's how far the cost of living has gone up. And I'm concerned, as are many other people, that if we continue to raise taxes without reducing the cost of government, all we're doing is giving money to a drug addict and crossing our hearts and praying that they're going to go and get rehab instead of more drugs. That's the way we see it, because our concern is, based on the information we got, and the lack of confidence we have in the administration to navigate through this. I mean, after all, we're coming out of a $120 million deficit. The only reason it was reduced is they didn't spend all the bond money they borrowed for Guam Memorial in 2016. And now, on the same day that they stand there and tell us that the state of the island is strong, we have a $17 million surplus, but by the way, we're going to have to raise taxes to cover a $67 million shortfall caused by circumstances beyond our control and unforeseen. And then later on it comes out, in addition to the $67 million, we have $41 million in accounts payable. And no one's talking about the tax liability, because on top of that, we know we're going to have somewhere around $140 million tax liability on top of this. So what's going to happen? We approve a tax cut, a tax increase. Are we going to come back in 6 months when the Trump budget cuts hit and say, oh, by the way, another unforeseen and unplanned occurrence has occurred on the other side of the ocean that we didn't see coming, and we need to raise taxes again 50%. And then when it comes time to October to pay the tax refunds, are we going to be coming back and saying, oh, we don't have enough money in our tax refund account, so we're going to need to raise taxes another 50%? That's the way it looks to us in the absence of any good faith efforts on the part of the government. Now, part of this is under your control because you guys control the budget. But most of it's under the control of the administration, and we need to see the administration make more of these efforts because they came to you and presented a budget in 2014. You approved a budget, they overspent it by $60 million. They presented a budget to you in 2015. You approved it, they overspent it by $59 million. That was beyond your control. That was on them. And now we hear that theoretically we have a $17 million surplus in 2017. The only way that happened is because you guys reduced what they asked for by $60 million, I think it was. So if you hadn't reduced it by $60 million, they'd be coming to you with a $47 million deficit again. So part of it, you guys control the purse, get smarter about controlling the purse, and maybe we won't be sitting here talking about the need for tax increases to offset unforeseen events. So we like the idea of a sales tax. We were hoping that the bill would include a roadmap to converting totally to a sales tax, but we understand why, because of bond covenants and stuff like that. You're taking it one step at a time, which we agree with. We just believe that we need to enact 247 first and start seeing some of those improved efficiencies to help offset the impact of any tax increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nagro. Mr. Sidfrey Linsangan, you're next, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, to all senators. I would like to commend the governor, his staff, all the directors for addressing this shortfall. And likewise, this body, Speaker Cruz, Vice Speaker Terlaje, and all of you. It's like a Pac-Man or Mayweather fight. Everybody is introducing bills to address this issue, and that's healthy. Well, what we need is not a Republican answer or a Democratic answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix the blame for the past, but accept our responsibility today and for the future, as quoted by President JFK. My dear senators, I'm against all tax increases. The issue here is the 67 million shortfall. Now, the governor have identified 17 million surplus. And then yesterday in the news, Director Lester Carson, he said the government has already cut $30 million. So 30 plus 17 is already 47. And then the judiciary have said that they will cut $4 million. And then in the estimated general fund revenue that you adopted, there's a 2% surplus, which is equivalent to $14 million. It's for deficit reduction. It's a reserve. Therefore, if you add all of this, it will total $65 million. So the problem is solved. There's no need to panic or raise the tax, because raising the tax will not hurt small business like us. It will hurt the many that are average citizen, the many that are poor. Just like JFK have said again, if the government cannot help the many that are poor, how can you save the rich that are few? Okay, and because of the 67 million shortfall, you will furlough the government workers, including the autonomous agency and federal workers. And the governor is correct because he has the power, he has organic authority as the responsible and general supervision for all government agencies. And Attorney General have justified that even the autonomous agencies workers will be furloughed. Yes, they are paying taxes, but they need to remember it's the private sectors that are paying their salaries. And the revenue that the autonomous agency are getting, who is paying for that? Where are they getting the revenue? Again, from the private sectors. Now, here's the scenario. The revenue that you adopted, the estimated revenue, altogether, without including all those clauses, the stipulation, is 1,098,227,689. We're talking about billion here. And you know what's the contribution of the private sector in just taxes alone? Is $765 million. And then if you compute the contribution of the private sectors to the special fund, is our total contribution is more or less $850 million, almost 80% of the total general fund. We finance you. We pay for your salary. We pay for all the government workers. And now, when you're in trouble, you will pass it to us again. There's a lot of companies already that are closing down, just like in my area in Harmon, like maybe 20. In the mall, you check the mall, so many stores are closed. Even GPO, even Micronesia Mall. Now, what's my point here? My point here is there's something wrong with the system that the legislature have adopted for so many years. Because when you do your budgeting, you failed to include the budget, one of the most important liability of the government. Your total operation is $688 million because you took out the $125 million for taxes stipulation, that's a clause, and then you took out the deficit reduction and the GMH pharmaceutical fund, the $15 million, and so on. And the special fund, which is $226 million. Now, what I'm talking about, you allocate $688 million for the operation, but you forgot to deduct the debt service or the obligation service, which is $85 million. That's why you have a problem. It's not only the $67 million. It's the debt obligation. You have to pay yearly $85 million for all those bonding fees, for all those debt fees. And that's what you did not include in your budget. I analyzed your budget and you forgot that. And it's not forgotten, but maybe that's the system that was adopted by so many legislatures in the past. That's why we came up with this problem. And that's almost $7 million a month. Because if it's only for the $67 million, it's solved. Because with the cutting that the governor have been doing, and you guys, we're only short of $2 million, which can be managed. And then you would like to apply it again to the taxpayers, wherein you introduce an amendment to roll back the salary of the appointed officials, but not the elected officials, in order for the taxpayers to support their high pay. That's unfair. That's injustice. It's like conducting the public hearing wherein you will give special treatment to all the directors, let them talk for 4 hours, and then you will let us talk for 5 minutes, and we have to wait here for 5 hours or 6 hours You are promoting stomach ulcer, back pain, and so many diseases. And the main thing there is private people that are financing the government will be discouraged to make meaningful testimony. See, because we are governed by our Bill of Rights and constitutional right. You need to implement a fair, impartial, equal treatment of all the people that will be coming here, regardless of his status, not giving special treatment to people with positions. Well, it's not at the end of the road, even though we have this $85 million, additional $85 million debt service and obligation, it can still be handled. Remember that historian 500 years ago, Nicola Machiavelli, of the Italian writer, thinker, he said, the end do justify the means. And you have the authority to do that. You raid the special funds, whatever is needed to make this government going. Transfer the money. You have the authority. You can amend the appropriation, the budget. You can do everything, especially if it's not yet committed. No, your main priority is to secure the well-being and security of your citizen. That's why a ruler or a leader sometimes use deceit, deception, intrigue, treachery, espionage to win wars, to attain his goal for the common good. But those bad things will not work now anymore because we are in the democratic form of government. They can go to jail, or just like Nixon, he was impeached because of what he committed on the Watergate. But the main thing there, the lesson there about Machiavelli, that's why he became so popular with the leaders and with the rulers, presidents, and prime minister. They adopted this theory: justify the means, the end or the result. Do justify the means. You do whatever you do in your authority to transfer that money, whatever is needed, the priority. And you will see, this one is just very simple to fix, you know. And yeah, and that's the main thing, Mr. Chairman. The 85 million, that's the that's a big shortfall. It's not only the $67 million. And then now we have this, the clause in the appropriation, the $125 million for the tax refund, because that one he cannot use if he did not use it, you know. But the main thing there again, the bottom line is, did your general fund estimate materialize? That's the main thing. If your estimate for the general fund did not materialize, then that's another factor. You see, right now, what you approve is $1,098,000,000 to $128,689. How about if it went down to 800 or 900? Then the more you will have problem. That's why it's good that the governor is doing everything that he feels that will cut the government on spending. And you guys are also sharing your part. And that's healthy, because the legislative and executive should not be united, or else we won't have any liberty. Yes, and adversity presents itself in many forms. And if a person does not master his or her circumstances, you'll be bound to be mastered by them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Byrne, you're next.
Thank you,
You'll be
Mr.
followed
Chairman.
by Jay, Mr. Ross, and then John Fernandez. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, Senators. My name is Edward Byrne. I'm Acting Director of the Department of Administration. I speak in support of Bills 248 and 249. Bill 248 establishes a single rate of sales tax on goods and services providing proceeds of 1% to the general fund and 0.75% to Guam Memorial Hospital and 0.25% to the Department of Education. A sales tax is visible and has a clear advantage in being one of the most easiest of taxes to collect. The taxpayer can see transaction by transaction how much tax he or she is paying, and the seller can accumulate and account for the amount that he will be collecting during the day and remitting the following month on a daily basis. That helps with cash planning. 45 states and the District of Columbia collect sales taxes. The highest is Louisiana at 9.98%, the lowest Alaska at 1.76%. The average is about 7%, 1% higher than the combined business privilege tax and sales tax of 2%, which is being proposed. Application of taxes varies from state to state, with some states taxing all transactions, others taxing food products at a reduced rate, and others exempting food in a similar way that is proposed in Bill 249. It should be noted the sales tax is charged only at the final transaction in the business cycle and does not cascade. A sales tax has several advantages over other more complex fiscal raising measures, in addition to the relatively easy collection process which I mentioned before. Most businesses use accounting software to monitor their business health and report results. All software programs in use in areas which use the United States dollar have sales tax accounting embedded. All point-of-sale hardware and software also have this feature. This will enable Guam to complete a quick introduction of the tax, enabling collection and availability to the general fund in a short time schedule. Extension of capture to internet transactions is also much easier than if revenue were being raised in any other way. Direct and indirect taxes each carry advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that it is flexible and exemptions can be granted and withdrawn within the overall tax framework. It is payable by all who spend money on Guam, not only its residents, but also the large population of tourists, which contribute so much to our economy. In Japan, sales tax is 8%, and in South Korea, value-added tax is 10%. The relatively low rate in Guam will not therefore be a disincentive. Any economic advantage flowing from the recent reduction in individual and corporate income taxes can only benefit, not impair, the proposed tax revenues. I spoke earlier about the ease of collection. Early and optimal collection is essential to the remedy for the loss of revenues caused by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. The reduction to government revenues has already been felt, and paying for the people and providers, which ultimately furnish government services, is becoming difficult. It is generally agreed that the income tax shortfall will exceed $68 million in fiscal 2018. Without a restoration of this lost revenue, there is no doubt that government services will be curtailed. A reduction in government activity will inevitably result in fewer services, whatever your particular view of its efficiency. Over the years, in different parts of the world, governments have imposed taxes to punish or reward different economic or social groups. This proposed sales tax is about as even-handed as a tax can be. It provides an increase in revenues to replace income taxes reduced by legislation not designed for application on Guam. These revenues are used after debt service has been satisfied to pay government employees and vendors who support government programs. Payments to employees, which is a significant part of the local economy, and to vendors who rely on sales to the government to pay their own bills, are in danger without the immediate and essential support which these two bills provide. Bills 248 and 249 satisfy the objective of plugging the fiscal drain. Bill 248 has the merit of simplicity. Bill 249 contains all the necessary rules and regulations necessary to effect collection already embedded into the legislation. We request your support of these bills. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. We would have now Mr. Ross, and he'll be followed actually before John. He'll be followed by Phil, and then you and Mr. Manjola, and then followed by Mr. John Camacho and Mr. Peter John. Okay, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Vice Speaker, Senators, good morning. Hafa. I am here to address the two bills addressed in this morning's hearing, which both attempt to create an additional source of revenue for the government of Guam by establishing a sales tax. Mr. Chairman and Senators, please allow me the opportunity, in the interest of time, to address both bills and point out the benefits and opportunities for the bills in combination. The establishment of a sales tax on products and purchases is welcome news to the Guam Economic Development Authority, in light of the fact that it creates an additional revenue source for the government of Guam. Additional revenue that is sorely needed during this tough financial time. Based on the conversations that we've had with the legislature over the past few weeks, I need not once again mention the shortfall that is created by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. So I will subdue any further testimony today regarding the $67 million revenue loss for fiscal year 2018. As I stated in my testimony on January 29, 2018, on Bill 23034, we welcome the implementation of a 2% sales tax on products and services, as it not only is a visible tax, but it's also a transparent tax that would have less of an impact on the companies that do business on Guam. Again, as I speak to my testimony from January 29th, I stated that we could establish this sales tax now and eventually transition our current business privilege tax into this sales tax within the next 8 to 10 years. Once we've reached a point where it would be economically feasible to refinance the existing bonds under the business privilege tax as a funding source, we can refinance those bonds and secure their payments with the newly established sales tax, and currently that date is 2025. But unfortunately, the time that we need to establish this sales tax is now, because the fiscal situation facing the island and the government today. This new revenue source will be looked upon as a formidable solution to our issues by our bondholders and rating agencies, but we do need to show that it can be established and collected and also has the potential to be a secure source of income within the next 60 to 90 days. In looking at these bills before us today, both bills have an immediate enactment, which addresses this urgency, but both bills differ in other areas that need to be addressed. So the Guam Economic Development Authority supports the intent of both of these bills, but would like to see the bills combined in a way that would make immediate implementation and collection as easily as possible. And at this point, Bill 248-34 does just that. It establishes a levy of 2% sales tax on products and services, dedicating 0.25% to the Department of Education and 0.75% to the Guam Memorial Hospital. Although it does not include any exemptions for this newly established sales tax, I'd like to ask that the legislature consider passing this bill as it addresses the immediate need and can be altered in the next phase of the new tax's implementation. Phasing in this new sales tax would be the best option that we have at the moment, which is why I ask this body to quickly approve this bill and then research and identify which exemptions listed in Bill 249-34 would be viable options, but at a later date. Please do not hold up the establishment of the sales tax only to debate on what should be exempt from this tax or not. These exemptions, although necessary, would complicate the process of establishment of this tax for both the government of Guam and the businesses who would need to identify which products would be exempt and which products would not. Bill 248-34, however, also does not address the implementation or assessment of an internet sales tax of 6%, which Bill 249-34 does. So merging this inclusion into Bill 248-34 would solidify this bill, 248, over the subsequent Bill 249. Should the legislature choose to adopt Bill 249-34, we'd like to see that it also includes a 2% levy on services, which is actually not included in the bill as is written today. To include, but not limited to, professional services, contractor services, banking and lending services, insurance services, and tourism-related services at the rate of 2%, as defined in Bill 248-34. Bill 249 was well thought out and includes the procedures to be looked at in the new levy's administrative process, addresses exemptions which are needed in the establishment of a sales tax, but it does complicate its implementation. This will likely slow the bill's passage through this body at a time when an immediate fix is necessary. Exemptions on food, prescription, baby products, ice, and water are necessary, but can be duly implemented after the sales tax is already established. We would also need to take a look at how we can create an exemption for some of our duty-free operations, but again, we can address that at a later date. There are practices that are out there where the establishment of a task force made up of members of the legislative branch, executive branch, and the business community can address these exemptions and implement them at the start of the next fiscal year perhaps, or calendar year, with enough notice to the public that these exemptions will be implemented. Again, Mr. Chairman, we ask that a 2% sales tax be implemented with either of these bills approved. However, immediately approved Bill 248-34, work can then continue to support its implementation with Bill 249-34 in the next 30 to 60 days after an assessment can be made by a special task force to look at exemptions and other qualifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Flores, Phil, you'll be up. I just know I was looking for your name, trying to balance you out.
I was hoping for an early Christmas, so I was looking up there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, other honorable members of the committee. I'm Phil Flores, and I'm going to wear two hats. First, I'm going to put on my entrepreneurial hat, and I'm not trying to brag on this, but I run 13 different companies in Guam in all types of different industries, trash, funerals, whatever. And 12 of them will pay any of the taxes that you levy on us, or we are supposed to levy with a sales tax on our customers. But I'm asking that, and now I'm putting on my banking hat representing GBA, I'm asking that banks be excluded from your bill, respectfully asking. I like their being excluded from your bill because I just don't know how to implement it. First, we went to the American Bankers Association and asked them, are there any sales tax, any jurisdictions that have a sales tax on banks' customers? Because if I understand correctly, the tax is not on the bank. The tax is on the bank's customers as a sales tax. They said, no, not for core income. For unrelated business like safe deposit box rentals, some states have that, but most of them don't have anything like that. Right now, we're paying a full 4% on our rental income for office space, and I imagine that that's included in a sales tax. We're happy to pay that. But on the core bank financial income, I can't envision how one of you comes up to our counter and pays your monthly auto loan or your mortgage loan payment, and let's say it's $400, and $300 is for principal, and $100 is for interest. Am I supposed to charge you 2% on that $100? It just won't work. We went through a well-intended amendment by Senator Rodriguez, but it was misguided and that was to attempt to tax banks as all other corporations are taxed, but it's just not done that way in our nation. So I respectfully ask or maybe you can tell me later on how it would be implemented. I could go back to the gang and see what our thoughts are on it, but I respectfully ask that, as in Senator Estevez's bill, that the financing, the lenders not be included. Or, excuse me, lenders, customers not be included.
Thank you, sir. Mr. John Fernandez, and I know you'll be followed by Mark
Can I defer to my chair?
You can share. Okay, you can have the chair. Thank you.
Buenas and Hafide, honorable senators. When I first got appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, masangani do na tentago ha ginini gabetno. That's what they said to me. Last night, I met with the parents. 150 parents came to, we invited all the PTO officers from the Department of Education to show up. So I'm telling you folks, I'm down here as a tentago of the parents that were there at that meeting. They told me, they said, Mr. Mendiola, we've been watching this from afar. We've seen what the department, the superintendent has done to date, and with the leadership of the board. We're worried, we're concerned. But because we're able to go out there and share what we're doing as a department. We visited 3 schools. There was only a handful of senators that came out to listen to what the community had to say. Logi Paingi, man, I tell you, last night, they said, Mr. Mendiola, stop asking and demand. Demand. We got the 14-point legislation. Senator Kalitsky is here. I had an opportunity to sit with him. What was the impetus for the 14 points? Every year, and Mr. Senator, Mr. Chair, you were also a board member, every year the 14 points, we put a dollar figure to that. That is the minimum standard, the minimum requirement to fund the 14 points of education. But then we always get a number lower than that. So we set the minimum here, but we get a lower minimum. But the department always comes and does what it needs to do to meet its mission. Last night, when we share with our parents, 31,000 students show up every day. Every day. And 4,000 employees show up every day. So sometimes the analogy that our GovGuam employees, or the analogy that was used today, that giving a drug addict, I take offense to that. No one is standing up and championing the rights of our employees, our students. You governing Guam employees, I don't look at you as druggies and giving you bad funding to fund drug habits. We have to provide a service. We can only cut. But in terms of revenue generation, that's the responsibility, in my humble opinion, is the legislature. Ugogogo Hamzu. Ms. Tomorrowisti. 31,000 kids. We got a board that was entrusted. You approved us, and there was 5 that were elected. If you're going to task us with certain things, and you're going to put mandates on the Department of Education, I have 4 children. One with special needs, and I keep saying this with everybody, and I have a wife that's a dedicated teacher. Some of you guys have that connection as well. The time is now, folks. I'm concerned. On March 13th, before the Department of Education, we're going to have to address this 32-hour work week. We've met with our business community. We met the Foundation of Higher Education. We met with senators. I've met with you folks. I've asked for certain support. It's come to this juncture. I see the police department, the fire department being shut down. We're reassuring our parents that if we ever come to that point, we will engage with them. You asked me when you confirmed my appointment to the Board of Education, do what is right. Togwi hafa mas malik para estudanteta. Pagu gagago hamzu. This bill that is before you, maproponi istinalay para mahatsa tax. They're going to raise the revenue. We need revenue. And Senator, I got to thank you, and I also got to thank the governor too, because they always identified Department of Education. And I asked you, and I appreciate that because you've come to the aid of the Department of Education. Any law that's going to support the Department of Education, we're going to support. There's other things, and that's the dilemma that you guys are faced with. There are other areas of government that needs attention. But we've been coming down here. I come and I support the superintendent, and that's our role, is to support the decisions, ask the tough questions of the superintendent as to the operational issues. We've met with our administrators. We're doing everything in our part to bring everybody to an understanding of the financial conditions of the government. We're here. So, dispensing, but last night I just, when I got it from the parents, I said someone has to take this position, and I'm no longer going to be asking. I'm going to be demanding that if we're going to hold ourselves to that 14 standards to provide the minimum qualifications or minimum standards for providing quality education in the Department of Education, then I'm going to demand, it's in the law. It's in the law. Until you guys decide you want to make changes to that, that is, I'll leave that wisdom up to you folks. But right now, I'm concerned of my 31,000 kids that are not going to wait for any excuses, or they're not going to ask us why we don't have a teacher in a classroom, or why we don't have an administrator to assist with the daily operations of the government, the Department of Education. We're mission-centric, folks. We're constitutionally mandated by the Organic Act to provide education from 5 to 16. Just last night, I got to thank Senator Talahi, looking at the gaps in terms of our security at the Department of Education. And we're going to close those gaps, but the safety of our kids are paramount. So I just want to share that with you folks. I have testimony from our parents that have come to our meetings that I will share with you folks. Some of the suggestions on how we can generate revenue, and we need the legislature support in doing that. And if you have any ideas that can enhance that, I know they're trying to raise rates for the fire department. We're trying to raise rates for operating our schools, for other services that we provide. We're holding elections. Do people forget that our administrators have to go and unlock the gate, unlock the cafeteria, turn on the power? It's our responsibility that has been tasked to the Department of Education. It's time that we start advocating for ourselves and taking a strong position on that. So, thank you, senators that have come up with possible solutions. I hope that we get this thing passed so that on the 13th, when I have to deliberate on whether or not we're going to go to a 32-hour work week, I hope that the legislature will be there standing beside us and helping us explain the position of the government, because I think we've done our part as best we can. Sizus Masi.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you and good morning, Senators. You should have a written copy of my testimony before you, and I will just go ahead and see if I can work through that as quickly as possible. We are here to provide a testimony in support of Bills 248 and 249. Given the situation with our government, our current financial position, there is a need for revenue relief for our department, and we're here to represent only our department, the Guam Department of Education. I know there was some comment before about agencies not showing up. I do want for the record to let Senator Uggan know, Senator San Nicolas, that we did submit yesterday written testimony. We're not able to show up here asking for an exemption for DOE from the reorganization, given the fact that we are reorganizing in order to meet our high-risk responsibilities, and we'd like some flexibility. So there is that. But we're here to testify on the sales tax proposals. We represent 4,000 employees, 31,000 students in our public schools. The fiscal crisis is real, and that's the message we've been giving out to the community. Now, last night when we sat before these parents, the PTO presidents and officers, we said that something that's working against us as an agency is that we've done what I think is a responsible thing to do, is going out into the community to placate the anxieties and the uncertainties. And I think the response we've gotten from them is, well, it looks like you guys have it under control. So the message I had last night is, I said, even though we are doing our best, we've cut $12 million in our agency savings, tried to forego further spending. Yes, it does, as Senator Uggan pointed out, it does hit the classroom when we don't buy textbooks or we don't expand pre-K or we shift library funds. But at the same time, as we've cut phase one, $12 million, when we go down and deeper, we're going to start to hit personnel. And you're going to discuss the furlough process. We're discussing it right now. There is some clear prioritization of employees in that furlough process. But in the Department of Education, when we look at that listing, I can't see which ones are non-critical to the mission. We have already we have a year-long hiring freeze in place at the central office, which we've held to. We've put a hiring freeze on assistant principals, which several vacancies have already existed. I know a comment yesterday was that we have 5 vice principals in one school. We don't have any schools with 5 vice principals, just to clarify the record. Right now, we're operating with a lot of vacancies. I want to say for the, also is that as we've done that, when we talk about our employees, our classified employees, our teachers, our limited term employees, we're talking about substitute teachers. We're talking about teachers who've got their college degree but not yet, working toward certification, but are filling those teaching positions in our classrooms. The retirees, the fully certified teachers, we've got a shortage of certified teachers, so our retirees are manning those classrooms. So when we start to think about furloughs and about releasing those, even if it's limited term, unclassified employees, there's no way we can do that without hitting the classroom. So last night I said, we are concerned. Don't let us fool you by coming out here and sharing the efforts that we're making. If we go deeper, we are going to hit the classrooms. And so we come out here to support both bills in the sense that they are raising the sales tax. And, we heard from the chamber that that's a better way to go versus, the business privilege tax. We're agnostic on which tax and how you want to raise revenues. We even offered our revenue enhancements. We said lease out the Teasdale building. We said lease out the PD property. We're offering those solutions, which are non-tax solutions. But at the same time, I also want to say that the difference between the bills I mentioned to Senator Esteves is that when there is a specific allocation, as 248 provides for the Department of Education, of course, we're going to come out and say that is something that's appreciated and we would support. And so that's the reason we support both bills. We prefer 248's allocation for GDOE, and if Bill 249 is the vehicle that's chosen, we hope that a similar allocation or greater will be made for DOE. We are concerned about the timing of implementation, so as soon as a solution can be reached and agreed upon by the legislature and the governor, the challenge for us as an agency is that we have to act soon. So the longer we wait for a solution, the sooner. And I've been telling Mr. Mendiola, our chair, that my preference was to have acted on March 1st to take further cuts, and they've asked for additional time to review those cuts, to hear from the legislature, and to have a board meeting before we go any further. With the perennial cash shortages, I think the legislature has raised it several times. Your cash position year to year, recognizing that we've seen cash shortages in prior appropriations, meaning we rarely receive the cash flow needed to fully meet the appropriation level that the legislature approved. We have been operating in a virtual state of cost containment. So, we've been able to use the transfer authority provided by the legislature, exemption from allotment reserves and so forth, to make some progress mitigating outstanding vendor payments and carryovers. I know that in prior situations I've been asked, how far behind are you with regard to your payables? Right now, the last information I saw was $12 million in payables, $7 million current. So I think the only thing over 90 days would be about maybe it's less than $1 million. It was a different position, year before and a year before that. I know Senator St. Nicholas, in this hearings had pointed that out. We've made progress. We've caught up. Now we're in a situation where all of this is going to be negated because of the fact that we're going to see much more severe cash flow issues if nothing is done. We think we've done our share. Like we mentioned the $12 million. We're prepared to go to the next step, but we're saying, look, this is going to impact classrooms. We're trying to protect them. We hope you will help us to find a solution to protect our classrooms. But if we have to, find a way to balance our budget, that's what we're left to do. That's what we're charged with doing. The only one thing I want to say is that, again, we do have revenue enhancement ideas that we put on the table. We're going to work with Senator San Agustin, our Education Committee Chair, to get that into legislation and put that before the body. But with all of this going on, our message is we need a solution, as soon as possible in order for us to understand where we're going to go for the rest of this fiscal year. So last night, just want to conclude, we did hear from the parents. They were concerned. They may be communicating with their schools about those concerns, but we wanted to let them know we're fighting for them. We're here to do what's right for our school system. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mendiola, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a follow-up to that, sir. We're probably the last quarter of the school year, and so I'm kind of concerned, with the potential furlough notices, a 32-hour work week, that when our teachers are on vacation or on break from school, that there's a big potential that they may not be returning back to our Department of Education. So that weighs heavy on us, because we're going to have to open our doors to meet the 180-day mandate of providing quality education. So the timeline is really real for the Department of Education. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind as you deliberate and as you guys help come up with the solutions for the Department of Education. Situs Masi.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to ask our colleagues here if they have any questions. We'll start with Senator Nicholas, who has tapped me already first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually had some questions for Mr. Camacho, Mr. Carlos Camacho.
Carlos, come on up. Just grab one of the chairs so that we can.
Is that everybody who signed up to testify?
No, we still have some more. We have still others to testify.
Did you want to go forward?
If my colleagues would like, we'll have everybody else testify before we ask the questions, and then if we ask everybody that's testifying, they can stay in the room. Is that okay, colleagues? Or you only have for them right now? Okay. Can we get the list, and then at least we'll know. My colleagues will know exactly how many folks are left, and we'll see how much longer it'll take. Oh, we only have Gus, 3 other individuals to testify. There's John Camacho, Mary Rhodes, and Bobby Spring. Okay, so why don't we have the 3 come up? Mr. Camacho, Peter John, Bobby Spring, come on up, and then we'll ask everybody the questions one time because there's only 3 left. Okay, go ahead. Okay, no problem. We'll call you, John, and okay. We'll just have the 3, and we'll start with Mr. John Camacho, this side first, and then you, and then Bobby, and then Ms. Rhodes. Yeah, Ms. Rhodes, you'll be last, okay? Even though you're the lady, you're the last, because you're the last to sign in. Mr. John Camacho from the Department of Revenue and Tax first.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the 34 na Instituto Guam. In honor si John Camacho, I'm currently the Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on both bills. But first, I would like to address Bill 248-34. And these are the reasons why we support Bill 248. Tax revenues will address unavoidable shortfalls by the various agencies as outlined in the bill and identify as the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, Department of Education, and DOA's General Fund. And because the bill current form compared with Bill 249-34 disregard any exemptions and may further reduce the tax revenue that the government desperately needs. Although DRT commends Bill 249, the author, obviously the recognition will impact our dire situation does not afford any missed opportunities to generate revenues. And what I like to basically do is some of the things that are addressed on Bill 248, I am making some recommendations basically to address the rules and regulations by basically adopting the Section 26704 general provisions of Title 11 Guam Code Annotated, Chapter 26, Article 1, shall apply to this Article 7. So basically, this is just what Senator Esteves did on the provisions. So it kind of like addressed everything, and it basically it flows with all the other articles. If you notice, all the articles 3, 4, and 5, and 6, basically they go under these general provisions. So that's probably one of the recommendations we're making. And basically, the second amendment that we're looking at is basically we're just adding again to be consistent by amending, Chapter 26, Article 1, Section 26.110A to input the general sales tax and Article 7 into that section. In other words, just to be consistent on all the articles. And I know my peers earlier addresses all the the two different bills. And, basically what we're saying is that if we amend this or take one from one bill to the other and addresses all these things that needs to be done, this is what we're looking for. And with that, I basically wanted just to say that I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one for their continued support and the time and effort shows your dedication as a true public advocate and servant to the people of Guam. Should you have any questions, please feel free to call me. Thank you.
Now the other, Mr. Camacho. Sir.
Buenas and saludos, Senor Chairman and members of the committee. Before I continue, I'd just like to apologize. Dr. Vincent Dueñas, our Associate Administrator for Medical Services, had to go back to the hospital to take care of some patient. My name is Peter John Camacho, Administrator CEO of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. I'm here today to present thoughts on the two important bills that propose to address the swiftly approaching impacts of the Trump cuts. As has been described previously, these cuts are important in making available to individuals and businesses more ready cash to stimulate economic activity. One outcome, however, decreases government revenues, which will have an impact on the ability to provide critical public services. Both bills seek to equalize this in the government's tax base by proposing the establishment of a 2% general sales tax on tangible personal property and any service business. 248-34 proposes to allocate the revenues collected as 1% to the general fund, 0.75% for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority for capital investment, operational requirements and reserves, and 0.25% to DOE for capital improvement needs. Bill 249-34, while advocating for the sales tax, is silent on how the new revenues would be allocated. The language of Bill 248-34 speaks to capital investments for the GMHA. This accurately describes certain plans that we would like to implement with regards to enhancing existing services we provide with the goal of improving patient outcomes. We must meet current standards of care regardless if a patient is served at the new hospital or the safety net hospital. The GMHA has submitted a listing of priority needs. A dedicated funding source would enable the realization of securing those needs as well as providing for the ability to recruit critically needed staff. The other would promote opportunities we had previously discussed in our modernization plan. We respectfully request this committee recommend the passage of Bill 248-34. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. String.
All right. Good afternoon, or should I say good morning, to Senator Joe San Agustin and members of this august body. Thank you for this opportunity. Just to clarify, my name is Bobby Shringy, and I will be speaking on behalf of the Guam Chamber of Commerce. I am currently there. What am I now? Oh, yeah, I'm the chair. I chair their legislative review and some committee, but it deals with legislation. Anyways, thank you for this opportunity this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to submit our position in regards to the government's fiscal crisis. Just to sort of identify on record, the position that's actually being presented this morning is not necessarily on any of the two specific bills that are on the table. This testimony instead encompasses a response to the various bills that have been introduced by lawmakers and the Governor of Guam, and represents what we feel is a palatable approach to address the financial needs and concerns of our government. I would like to first start off by emphasizing that the Guam Chamber of Commerce does not, and I think we've noted this on many occasions, does not support any proposal to increase the BPT, the business privilege tax. However, we understand that with the circumstances being outlined by appointed officials and elected leaders, that if it is the resolve of the government of Guam to pursue certain increases, that a balanced and responsible approach be pursued which will create the least amount of an impact to island residents, while providing the government additional funds to continue critical services. With that in mind, the Guam Chamber of Commerce recommends that the following suggestions for elected officials to consider as a comprehensive proposal and under one bill. Multiple legislations will face the unfortunate consequences of political unpredictability and thus will further impact the consumers. Likewise, we believe the items listed are realistic in terms of attaining the support by elected officials of elected officials. Item number 1, cost-cutting measures. The government of Guam must mandate that a plan of action must be presented to lawmakers within 6 months of enactment that identifies at least $33.5 million, which represents, by the way, 50% of this magic number of $67.5 million that is being anticipated as the annual shortfall. At least $33.5 million of permanent cost-cutting measures within the general fund. This should not include hiring freezes on vacant positions or proposals that impact critical services such as public safety. The government must immediately implement those actions that don't require legislative actions, and it is understood if those who do require action by lawmakers that it takes place after the 2018 general elections. In other words, this plan of action needs to be addressed this year and should not be compressed by political ramifications. The government of Guam, item number 2, conversion of a business privilege tax to a sales tax. The government of Guam must create the rules, regulations, and implementation within 1 year of enactment to begin a conversion of the BPT to a sales tax over a 5-year period. With the bond covenant pledging, I believe, 3 of the 4 points of the BPT, a phase-in and phase-out plan can be achieved by allowing the BPT to increase by 1 point each year, while increasing the the sales tax by 1 point until 2022, when the BPT will eventually become 0% and the sales tax will be at 4%. The Guam Chamber of Commerce has been a firm proponent of the sales tax, for over the years, and has emphasized the revenue potential for the government of Guam, which stands to generate a greater amount than the BPT. While our proposal does not recommend any specific exemptions, which we believe should be left for elected leaders to decide, we do suggest that some consideration or creativity must be established for those entities who promote themselves as duty-free, which is one of the key marketing advantages in marketing Guam as a tourist destination. We also believe, and I actually wanted to add this right now after talking to Mr. Flores and having that clarification, that we should also consider some creativity for the banking industry. Our organization is open to assisting the government on this consideration. Item number 3, an online sales tax. The government of Guam must create the rules, regulations, and implementation within 6 months of enactment to establish a 5% sales tax on internet purchases. While we understand that the reality of a full implementation may take a little longer, we believe that mandating the process would allow the initiation. This is a new revenue source for the government that would help supplement the shortfalls. The Guam Chamber of Commerce has always endorsed the Buy Local campaign, and an online sales tax would provide local retailers a level playing field, while online retailers, in terms of the online retailers paying the BPT. The impact towards the consumer should be minimal. However, the revenue potential for the government would be substantial. Item number 4, property taxes. The government of Guam must review and recommend some adjustments to the real property tax within a 6-month period. It has been noted on many occasions that Guam has among the lowest property taxes in the nation, and a discussion on increases has taken place numerous times over the years without any resolution. It is understood that this is a community-based issue, and whatever is collectively agreed upon, with the consideration of those in certain income brackets, should be implemented upon the next transaction. This option can very well be an identified and dedicated funding source to help offset the financial constraints of the Guam Memorial Hospital, which we will obviously leave in the hands of the Guam legislature. The Guam Chamber of Commerce does not have any specific recommendation on any proposed increment, but will certainly join the government during these critical discussions and will request industry experts to participate as well to help craft a very balanced proposal. Finally, item number 5, a visible business privilege tax. While the Guam Chamber of Commerce, once again, does not support any increases in the BPT, we understand that there are fiscal concerns with federal tax cuts. And thus, if it is the resolve of the government to increase this tax, that the proposal on the table be a 1-point increase, thus ending up with a 5% visible BPT with a sunset provision of 1 year. A visible BPT, as outlined in the now repealed Public Law 2741, if duplicated, would have the least amount of an impact on both consumers and businesses. Consumers would understand what portion of their total cost is associated with the BPT, which helps with those entities who would normally increase their margins dramatically with an invisible tax. And businesses would have some cushion in paying their taxes on net of the BPT. This is indeed the most palatable means of minimizing the impact for all parties. After the sunset provision expires, consumers would have some historic reference on the cost of goods, hence the best opportunity to see prices roll back versus an invisible BPT. With the eventual conversion to a sales tax, the consumer should continue to see the visibility in the taxes, hence the impact should be the least at the cash register. Plus, with the implementation of the other recommendations in this testimony, we believe the government should be able to stabilize finances that the 1 year sunset should be feasible. The Guam Chamber of Commerce understands the adverse implications that furloughs and/or reduced hours of government employees would have on the economy, and does not support this option. Likewise, our community cannot and should not be shortchanged with public safety, with the closure of police precincts and fire stations. This is immoral. But at the same time, the government needs to continue in operating the way, the government needs to discontinue in operating the way it has for years. Spending habits need to move from wants to needs, and frivolous expenditures need to end. In summary, the Guam Chamber of Commerce does not support the raising of the BPT, primarily since we represent over 40,000 island residents who are not only employed by the over 400 members of our organizations, but they are all consumers of Guam. It's like all of us here. We owe it to them to assure that any solution adopted by elected leaders would either be beneficial for residents or contain the least of adverse impacts. Therefore, we believe a balanced and responsible approach, as noted in this testimony, should minimize the increased costs at the cash registers while assuring the government does its part with cost containments. The Guam Chamber of Commerce wishes to be the government's partner in progress, and thus is certainly open to further discussions on these issues. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bobby. Mrs. Rhodes.
Hafa Adai and buenas, everybody. It's great to see a lot of the senators here. Before I read my testimony, I was talking to our chairman and the chairman of Guam Chamber of Commerce, and I know that there have been many bills introduced, and I think it is actually imperative that we all work together in this. I think we all agree in that, and that timing is of an issue. Outside of this public hearing, which I know is addressing 2 bills introduced by, of course, Senators Esteves and our chairman of this committee, Senator San Agustin, I think it's important that we all work together on what has already been introduced and look at how we can come up with a comprehensive solution. And I know that we were remiss, Senator again introduced his bill and already had his hearing yesterday, which we missed, and I think that that hearing was probably the most important one for all of us to be at. So I really apologize. You were so fast to put it out there and then have a hearing, and we really should have been there yesterday. But I would like to humbly request that we all get together with the senators looking at all of the introduced bills, and to consider especially Senator Uggin's bill and try to come up with one comprehensive bill, because there's no way any of us can provide testimony to support one or the other or to oppose one or the other, because I think it's just a very complex matter. So with that, I would like to also put the caveat there that we are not for or against any one of the bills that have been introduced for that matter, and that we want a balanced approach to this government's fiscal crisis. So, Hafade, my name is Mary Rhodes. I'm the president of the Guam Hotel Restaurant Association. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide input and insight to ensuring our legislature as well as the executive branch agree on a balanced approach for the government's crisis. I do agree, though, with the sentiments of Ken Leon Guerrero that this has been an ongoing issue and that there are a lot of things that we have been seeing within the government, and that the tax reform is just what really put us over the edge. The people of Guam have seen several draft bills of legislation and introduced with that only revenue enhancement bills, with the exception of Senator Agustin's bill on changing agencies and looking at cuts. With the anticipated budget shortfall and continued operational deficit, we are not only looking for financial relief for GMH and Guam DOE, but looking at the entire government and all. The reductions in the federal budget and taxes, again, further exacerbate the government's continued problems with its ability to live within its means. Recently, GHRA released a survey on the different types of tax increases being discussed for the short and long-term period. And I would like to provide some of that preliminary information. We're still collecting data, but we have only received about 7% response rate at this time, and so it's very preliminary. GHRA strongly feels the government needs to have a balanced approach, and we need to look at implementing cost savings measures, also better ways or improved ways of collecting tax revenues, promulgating rules and regulations when bills are passed into law and enforcing them properly, and also look at the process when new laws are being considered. In lieu of a position, it's important that we provide information, also take an active role, and be a part of the discussion, especially when there is such an overall financial impact to not just our tourism industry, our largest industry, but to overall cost of goods and services for all consumers. We understand the adverse impacts that furloughs or reductions in hours or in force will have on the government. No one ever wants to make these cutbacks or operational changes to address a budget shortfall or deficit. The harsh reality is that everyone, and not just the government of Guam, we are all experiencing cutbacks in revenues as well as jobs and income. For example, private sectors, specifically in tourism, have been making changes just since this last July and August with regards to revenue shortfalls because of declining markets from Japan, as well as the North Korea threats and everything that has happened ever since then. We've also seen exiting strategies from travel groups like RNC Tours, exiting of Delta Airlines, and termination of routes and changes with other routes, and also airline capacity with our largest airline, United Airlines. Right-sizing operations is a necessary and just way of managing any business, not just government of Guam, but any entity. Government of Guam must and should look at areas of duplications. GHRA understands there are critical services needed for public safety, health, and education. But we must have government accountability. We remain steadfast in our belief that the legislature should be creating laws to help grow the economy instead of suppressing or inhibit growth by increasing costs of doing business through increased taxes, fees, wages, or additional government regulations. It's our goal to find a fair deal, which will require some collaboration and compromise. If we all remember FDR, what he did during that time, during the Depression, he provided a fair deal. And I think it's time for all of us to sit at the same table to discuss that. GHRA hopes that the information we provide will lead to that discussion so we can work together on a plan of action and strategy. We also hope that it will be considered beneficial to all concerned and provide a balanced approach, again, to the government's financial crisis. With more than $90 million in accounts receivables at revenue and taxation, one of our questions we ask is, do you believe the government of Guam will continue to collect those taxes, even with new taxes introduced? We have a serious problem in that, and we need to address it. Our ability to collect existing and new taxes, we cannot afford the government and the private sector and our consumers, our residents of Guam, our taxpayers, to continue to bear the burden of the government's inability to manage its finances. So 80% of our membership at this time have responded that they do not believe that increasing taxes will solve our problems. 60%, however, believes that mandating government cutbacks and establishing cost-saving measures will be important. 76% said that even with the collection of it, that the government of Guam will not effectively implement, enforce, and collect all taxes for both current and new taxes. 52% were in favor of providing additional resources to Department of Revenue and Taxation through ND funding in order to collect the taxes. 36% was not in favor, but 52% were in favor in giving the additional resources to Rev and Tax. Any impact of tax increases, we all feel it. As the largest employer outside of the government of Guam, the tourism industry is constantly barraged with new legislation, regulations, fees, and licenses and taxes. According to the GHRA membership, 91% said they will increase the goods of services, whether any one of these tax increases takes place. 38% said they will limit expansion or capital improvements. 33% will reduce work hours for full-time and part-time employees. 21% said they will implement layoffs. 42% will freeze any new hiring opportunities. 25% will reduce wages. 25% will also limit training opportunities and wage increases. 66% will replace jobs with advanced technology. 38% will reduce health insurance benefits. 16% will terminate health insurance benefits. 8% will reduce retirement plan offerings. 4% will terminate retirement plan offerings, and 38% will consider eliminating other benefits. Guam is getting more expensive as not only a destination, but a place to live. We will continue to transfer the cost to the consumer when there are increases in prices. Each time you tax private sector, directly or indirectly, businesses will increase their costs of doing business and right-size operations. The tourism industry and the employers in the private sector do already pay their fair share in taxes. It is our government's responsibility to manage it without further taxation. Although we've been celebrating the increase in arrivals from larger markets like Korea, and we've seen hotel occupancy tax and GRT grow, the fact remains that the industry is struggling despite these numbers. We are becoming less competitive within Southeast Asia. We are already and have been very non-competitive even with Hawaii. GVB and GHRA's tourism stakeholders have done a great job over the years in diversifying the market. But costs have been rising and businesses have been adjusting the cost of doing business. Raising taxes sets a dangerous precedent. Even with all of the justifications that we've heard, and we understand the sentiments of all the agencies and the pressures that they have to deliver services, it's important to note that any increase in the business privilege tax or sales tax will have an impact to every consumer with immediate changes to costs and goods and services. 32%, only 32% are in favor of looking at increase the business privilege tax with a sunset provision of 1 year, looking at changing it. That's converting from 4% straight to a 4% sales tax. 60% are in favor of converting the business privilege tax. 32% are in favor of increasing 1 or 2%. 60% are not increasing the business privilege tax on its own. 36% are not in favor of increasing business privilege tax to a sales tax, but 60% are in favor of converting it eventually, which is what the Chamber's position is. Introducing a sales tax, though, which is what this draft legislation is about, is creating a new tax system for Guam that would take several years to implement, requiring new POS systems, additional collection efforts, and reporting processes. Although a sales tax can be argued that this form of taxation is, yes, visible and less of an impact to the consumer, it does require more time to implement and will change, more importantly, Guam's tourism model today. We are a duty-free destination. Duty-free is not just one store or entity. It is not duty-free shoppers Guam. Duty-free is all of Guam today. We do not have a sales tax. I know that there are arguments for and against it, But by changing Guam's tax status to include a sales tax, we will have inherent challenges. The following includes some of the sentiments of GHRA's members on the sales tax. But before that, we have to put out there the caveat that we may hurt ourselves by changing a tax-free status. The market conditions of today are already challenging, and introducing a sales tax might affect our competitiveness even further. The legislative body should look at all sides of the sales tax as a longer-term strategy, not for a solution today, and really look at the impact of introducing a new sales tax in the future as a conversion or looking at other things. Furthermore, more discussion needs to take place regarding our exemptions, allowing tax refunds possibly at the airport for those who qualify as duty-free, allowing exemptions at the point of purchase, again, with those who qualify as duty-free, and understand, again, any of the new requirements that go along with the sales tax. 48% felt that a sales tax will affect our competitiveness. 44% did not, though. So we're split right in the middle, because I know a lot of people have talked about a sales tax for a while. 20% said yes, that they should allow exemptions at the airport, like you see in a lot of Asian countries, Korea, Japan. You can easily line up and get your sales tax refund or exemption if you're not from within that country, if you're a national from somewhere else. But 60% felt that there should not be a tax rebate at this time. To increase, for those who are interested in increasing business privilege tax, but not a sales tax, 16% said yes, they would be interested in increasing it by 1%, 4% by 2%, but 72% said they are not supportive of increasing the business privilege tax in lieu of a sales tax. And the last one on that matter is 48% said absolutely no to increasing both a business privilege tax as well as a sales tax, because we haven't seen that yet, but we wanted to address that. And the other half, 52%, said no comment. In favor of an online sales tax for internet purchases only, 36% said yes, 48% said they do not, and 16% said they do not have an opinion. As far as property tax, more than 2/3, 68% said that they are in favor of increasing property tax. 32% said they are not. So as the leading NGO, and I know it's very difficult for the Guam Visitors Bureau being here, but we have had a meeting with a lot of our stakeholders, and there are a lot of things that are on the table, but we would appreciate, again, the opportunity to work together with you to discuss all of the tax proposals, but also look at the cost-cutting measures for the government in one bill. So I would like to thank you again for your opportunity, and I'm open for any questions at the end of this session. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'll now ask my vice chair, Senator Rodriguez, you have one question that you wanted to ask, sir?
Thank you very much, and good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. Perhaps for Jay Rojas and for DRT, you know, as the oversight of GVB, I know that one of the concerns, and I know Mary Rhodes had brought it up, about the sales tax. If we implement a sales tax, what does that do to our tourists? I remember I used to work in the industry as a sales clerk, and one of the things that we had promoted was that Guam is duty-free. And so when you buy here, it's cheaper if you buy it here versus you buy it in Japan or, you know, wherever they're from. How prepared are we, or how difficult it is for us to establish something like a tax refund system at the airport?
Without being at the airport, I cannot actually answer that question, essentially because that would actually have to be set up at the airport, but there are other options. In some cases in Japan, any purchase over $56 or 5,600 yen, I believe it is, you can actually get your actual refund, or they will not charge you taxes. They'll just take a copy of your passport and your visa, your tourist visa at that moment, and then that can be worked out with rev and tax. This is one of the things that I think again, this task force, if it's set up after we implement a sales tax, to look at exemptions, duty-free options, other things that we can do, can actually hammer out at a later date. I really couldn't answer you as far as how long that would take or what that would look like, but there are options that are out there. Again, as Mary had actually said, we could set up a facility at the airport to be able to return anything that they do pay in taxes. We would just have to figure out exactly what would be deductible, what we would be able to pay back. Again, so that's why it kind of complicates things a little bit further, which we are afraid might tie up any type of establishment of the sales tax at first.
Okay, so for Mr. Camacho, is that going to be a complicated task for you to implement some sort of refund system?
I believe so. I think we need to work something out, and it's something that maybe we can sit down and take a look at all the options, what we can do, and then we can go from there. I'm not too sure. I'm not familiar with the refund in other places, but we certainly can look into it and see what we can do.
Okay. If GVB was here, I would ask GVB, but perhaps Mary, you're the closest to that industry. If this body had implemented something, and as Jay had recommended, implement it and then work it out in the future, the near future, does that kind of make things very difficult in terms of the impression it's going to leave for those who are here, and them taking back and say, well, Guam is not a duty-free port anymore?
Right. I think, again, it is a complicated matter. Raising taxes is very complicated. It's a matter of timing. I understand we need the money now. That's why Chamber is looking at a conversion, right, of increasing business privilege tax now with a rollback, and then giving us time to look at a sales tax. Because if you increase the sales tax now without any of those exemptions or rebates in place for nationals outside of the U.S., it really could damage our reputation and our image of Guam as that duty-free destination and make us less competitive than we are already. We already have been having challenges. If you guys don't understand where we're at, Japan is down by 40% this last month. It has been for the last 4 months. And there's no way to bring all of that back, even as if you bring in 300,000 more Korean tourists. A lot of strategies are in place with GVB with regards to how to address the Japan market. And this time now to change our tax model and how we promote Guam is not, it would only further complicate matters when already the tourism industry is struggling. Projections for this month, normally we try to have a good year starting out. We had a really bad third and fourth quarter and an even worse first quarter. And the projections through May aren't good. Even with Japan Airlines bringing in additional seat capacity with another flight in May, it does not make up the shortfalls that we already have with Delta and United making changes. So no matter what we do in the strategy in the next even 6 months to a year, the writing has been on the wall for a while, not just on taxes, but also on arrivals. We have hurt ourselves as a destination with overall seat capacity. You can add $3 more million in the marketing budget for GVB, and it still can't address what they're going to do until we address seat capacity at the airport with airlines.
All right, thank you. Yeah,
but
I appreciate that, yes.
One more thing on the ability to bring in taxes. I think it's important to note, and I know we've been on this with the whole Airbnb, that's an example of how we introduce a new tax. 3 years ago, at the time, Senator Tina Munoz-Barnes introduced that. We have yet to promulgate rules and regs on how to collect that. If you look at where those 240 Airbnb businesses with having more than 2/3 of the Korean population go to and other tourists, you're looking at total room nights. If you take an example of, let's say, 240 Airbnb businesses with an average of 5 rooms, at a cost of a low average of $150 per night. And even at 50% occupancy, you're talking over $24 million right there. And we have not implemented that in 3 years. And I know that GVB has been talking to Rev and Tax about it, and I've been talking to the compliance department about how can we get more compliance officers out there so that we can get those businesses registered and not just paying hotel occupancy tax, but GRT and everything else that they need. That's an example of how we created a new tax system, not tax system, but a new tax requirement for businesses, but yet it's been almost 3 years since it was implemented. And so I really encourage all of you to look within yourselves that we may say yes on these things, but implementing it is far more difficult than you imagine. And it's not to blame the employees of the agencies. It's not to blame management. It's honestly, it's a follow through from beginning to end. And that's why even talking about a sunset clause or a rollback, a lot of people are questioning whether or not even after elections, the new administration would even take the rollback back. Or there'll be another extension on that sunset clause. So we're here to have real discussions and really honestly talk about the projections of how do we solve this without any promises of, you know, a sunset clause or a rollback, or can we implement this? We really need to not just discuss what we're going to do, but think through the implementation and operationalize it of how all of this will really generate the revenue we promised to generate and collect. Because if we did that, we wouldn't be talking today. We'd already have the revenues collected and in place. We wouldn't need that discussion here today. We won't need new taxes.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, just one more question for Mr. Camacho, for Mr. Carlos Camacho. He did a very well presentation on what he presented this morning. I just wanted to ask, do you have any information on any of the tourist-related revenue that we may expect, and if ever there is some sort of exemption that's provided for tourists to preserve Guam's duty-free status, at least for our tourists, what type of impact would that have?
Just for correction, like I said, the data set I used was BPT collection, and it's all included under one category, retail. And if I'm not mistaken, I remember this question being asked during your guys' committee as a whole, because I do watch you guys' session, and the question was asked about duty-free. So duty-free stores do pay BPT. So I'm assuming if they don't want to expose the sales tax as a transparent document so we don't hit the duty-free status, maybe we could exempt them from sales tax and just shift it to the BPT because it's in the back side of the door. So, but they do pay BPT last time I heard under the duty-free sales. So it could be creative. It's just that at the end of the day, you want to make sure, like the GHRA said, is after you do your austerity measures and all that, what's the real value after collecting? But right now, the cumulative data that we presented was, it's all in one. Retail is one, the 2.9 billion is one. So duty-free is part of the $2.9 billion sales, paying BPT already. So when we do the sales tax, she's probably correct that the tourists will say, oh my God, I'm paying sales tax, supposed to be duty-free. But they forgot to know that way back when Senator Ben introduced the visible GRT, it showed that they paid BPT. So it did not, to me, it did not affect the market. That's just my opinion. But we already had a tax product, BPT, in the back door. Senator Ben did a visible BPT, then it's exposed. He just changed it to sales tax, same thing. That's just me saying that. But what I'm saying, it's already been taxed under BPT. So if the sales tax is going to make a shake in the tourism industry, then maybe exempt them from, this is just me again, maybe exempt them from the sales tax because they're already contributing to the BPT, and then just adjust the duty-free BPT so whatever revenues lost is closing the gap. That's just a suggestion.
Can I add to that, if I can? You know, if you go back to the original BPT or visible BPT law that Senator Ben introduced that became public law, 2741, it wasn't a mandate, it was an option. So the business actually had an opportunity to do so or not. So going back to what Carlos stated and also what Mr. Phil Flores stated earlier, you know, all of this is just suggestions, right? But obviously there's going to be, we don't want to be the ones who are going to say, hey, this should be the exemption or that should be the exemption, because that really is the body that's in front of us. But a consideration can be considered for that duty-free status, which is also identified in our position, as well as for the banks. But not an exemption, but that to remove them from the visible BPT option, if that is going to be the option. I mean, it's just throwing it out there. Because obviously, like Mr. Flores stated, there are complications with banks when it comes to sales taxes. Maybe on this particular case, we're not telling the duty-free folks that you're completely exempt from this, but we're saying, hey, we can consider this on the invisible basis as an option.
Okay, thank you. Senator Nicholas, you have some questions, and then we'll go from the right of Senator Nicholas for any of the questions. We'll go down the line, and then we'll go the opposite of me, to the left. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Camacho, hi. Thank you for that very good presentation. I just wanted to clarify some of the information. In referencing your presentation, you used a lot of the calculations based on the tax bracket for those who make from $9,325 in taxable income to $91,900 in taxable income on the individual basis. So basically, you based your analysis on the third and fourth income tax brackets. Is that correct?
That's correct. I based it on the 15% tax bracket, and that's where majority of the median household income is at. I did not go in the higher level, as I explained. I just target that one exercise, and like I said earlier, we could do another exercise for a lower bracket just to see the impact.
Well, just based on the information that you provided here, everybody below that bracket is actually going to be impacted by a sales tax increase, because I'm looking here at this this chart that you provided, tax filers by rate category.
Right.
And everybody below those two brackets have a zero variance in their 2017 to 2018 tax rate, which means that they're all going to be adversely impacted by a sales tax increase.
You're correct, and that's the 10% bracket that didn't have no change.
Right.
But what I didn't explain here, these are the same group that has the other tax benefits that doesn't affect their tax cut. So for like the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit, the double exemption from 12 to 24. So those, that's why I said this is very conservative. Those are the numbers I don't have. So if we wanted to do a full exercise, if I can find a true tax filer and see what the true benefit is, then we can do that analysis. But you're right, that 10% 17 rate and the 10% 18 rate has a zero variance. There's no change. Right. But they do have a tax benefit on, and that's combined with the married couple from 12 to 24, as I said, and the child tax credit from 1,000 to 2,000. So that improves their tax exemption or tax exemption before they're exposed to a tax on the 10%.
That's assuming that they fit into those categories. I mean, if they're a taxpayer that does not have a additional child tax credit benefit, for example, they don't get to have that kind of offset. So just strictly on a pure basis, comparing the apples to apples on this sheet, notwithstanding whatever deductions or other credits they may be getting, they would be adversely impacted by the sales tax increase.
Yeah, across the board, yes.
Right.
The 2%.
And the other, well, I also wanted to point out, Mr. Chairman, that when you add up the number of taxpayers, actually those two bottom brackets, they make up 53.47% of the total tax base. So the reality is that the majority of the taxpayers, just on a pure basis, are actually going to be adversely impacted by this. And another point that needs to be made, Mr. Chairman, is that while we're looking at these tax, the tax cuts as an offset to the sales tax, this is almost like the government of Guam situation in reverse with respect to cash flow. These tax cuts aren't going to be realized as savings until they file their taxes, which is a year later. They're going to be impacted by these sales taxes immediately, which is going to be an immediate cash flow impact on these taxpayers. And so for that, I mean, every bracket is going to have an immediate cash flow impact. The bottom two brackets are going to, on a pure basis, have an adverse impact. The brackets on top of that, they'll come out ahead a little bit. But I think a lot of the things that we worry about up here are the effects of even a 2% to a 4% increase on those who are most vulnerable when it comes to being able to pay for it. Another item that I wanted to point out was this analysis, Mr. Camacho, is based on the tax filers, but that doesn't include all the population out there that isn't a tax filer.
That's right. I'm just looking at people that have filed taxes based on their income category, and that's the guys that are saying you're raising taxes and you're minimizing my disposable income. So I'm just showing a reflection of how we shifted what used to pay to the government controlled, how we shifted the tax policy to them at a 3% savings. Or in this case, like you mentioned, there's some of them has zero savings, but I did not disclose the other tax benefits that will increase their disposable income.
Thank you for that. Because when you look at the total, we have 63,522 taxpayers, right? Now, earlier with the Department of Education testified they had 31,000 students. That takes us to about 94,000 in population, but that leaves us another 60,000 people out there. And so that's, I'm just putting these all on the record, just based on the numbers that's being shared in the hearing. I mean, I remember growing up, my Nana Paka, she lived with us. She wasn't a taxpayer, but she would always like to go out and buy her 12-pack of Coke every week, and somebody would give her some money or she'd babysit, and, Nana was always very resourceful. Or she'd go, and I remember she would even go out to the yard and pick the, oh God, I forgot the Chamorro name for the banana, the big fat cooking banana. And, or she'd grow her okra and she'd go and she'd sell it at Payless or at the vegetable markets up in the north. So, there's a lot of, I can see how this just on an analysis basis, it looks like it can work for a certain group of people, but there's a big group of people out there that will still be adversely impacted by it, and that's just a concern that I wanted to register on the record. Mr. Camacho, I wanted to have a conversation, I'm sorry.
Could I just add one clarity?
Sure.
When you said there's 63,000 tax filers and there's actually 180,000 population, don't forget this tax filing is a combination of individual and married couple, and then they have probably their child below them. So I don't have the population count per tax filer, but I'm assuming that majority of husband and wife may have 2 or 3 child, so it's family of household of 5. So it doesn't show this tax filers is just the individual filer, right. But I did not dissect how many kids are attached to those filers, right? Because there's 2 categories, individual and married couples with kids. Right. So if you add all of that, so this 63 should be a multiplier to include those kids.
Well, actually, just my calculation that I gave you actually would bump that average up because I said 63,000 filers plus 31,000 kids. Yeah. So I added back, I probably added more children to our population than we have in filers.
Oh, okay. All right.
But anyway, I mean,
I just want to make
these
sure
are all just preliminary. These are all just very
just
surface
numbers.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, real quick. I actually just realized the time. I have a meeting at the office at 12. So I wanted to see if there was any questions before I can head out. Yeah, sure.
Senator Lee, you have a
question? Sorry about that.
Bobby?
Sorry about Senator. I just wanted to, because I just they're calling me like crazy here.
Does anybody have any questions other than Senator Lee? Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. All right. Thank you especially, Ms. Rhodes, for your testimony this morning and for all of you to help us provide your subject matter expertise. My question first is for the Department of Administration, and then the same question to you, Mr. Shrinji. So for Mr. Byrne, does the administration concur with the revenue projections that were provided earlier by Mr. Camacho in his presentation?
Excuse me. I think we need to get to Bobby so that you can get out here.
Okay. I understand, Mr. Chair. I'm asking the question first to Mr. Byrne, and then the same question will be asked to Mr.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bobby, get ready.
The revenue projections that I saw were generally in line with what we thought. I mean, I can't say that they're exactly the same, but they were within a reasonable tolerance.
Okay, thank you. And has the administration determined the soonest date of implementation for this tax that's proposed?
That, may I ask Mr. Camacho to refer to that?
Your question basically is that if the law passes at a certain time, will it be implemented right away?
I guess my question is the soonest date of implementation, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around particularly the new cash that would be infused from the private sector with the implementation of this sales tax proposal.
I guess if the law passes and basically it says that it's effective, whatever effective date is, we'll see what we can do. I think
I'm just trying to foresee any challenges that Revenue Tax and maybe even DOA might have in implementing this tax immediately.
I think we can, with a very reasonable time, I think we can make adjustments to our system. I think we can do it in a few weeks. I mean, those things that we can do. For DOA, I don't know, I can't speak for DOA, but for us, I think we can tweak a little bit on our system to accept the 2% sales tax.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Sherji? So I'm not sure if you were here for Mr. Camacho's presentation, but he outlined a number of revenue projections, and I just wanted to see if maybe representing the chamber, if you would concur with some of those projections.
I didn't get a chance to see it, so.
Okay.
But I do know Carlos. He's a good friend of mine. He's also a neighbor in the building. And just to kind of, for the record, he did call me yesterday evening to talk to me about it, to present his presentation. Fortunately, we couldn't meet at the time, but I definitely will work with him today or tomorrow, and we will, yeah. But so I can't really, unfortunately, answer that.
So in terms of the date of implementation, from the private sector perspective, do you think, what are your thoughts about a timeline?
Well, it's once again, it's one of those things where it's more or less the discussions that we've been having are more on what it should be, meaning what's going to be put on the table. And I think once that's discussed, the timelines could really, if everybody's palatable with it, I guess timelines should really be within a 30-day period or so. But once again, I don't want to say the timelines because we don't really have. The question is, what's the implementation part going to be? Yeah.
Ms. Rhodes?
So I think you're really asking operationally. The reality of when businesses implement this and when government of Guam receives the revenue enhancements, correct?
I think my real goal in asking these questions is twofold. I'm trying to determine if this is how much will be generated and when we can expect to receive the money. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think about it from...
Well, I think it'll be good to, number one, get a copy of the presentation so we can check with our, with our private sector groups whether or not these revenue enhancements based on sales and would be real based on declared sales receipts, right? The second thing is really the implementation of anything. If you're talking about the BPT, that system's already in place. So it would be a matter of the businesses just updating the number from 4% to whatever it is, right? So that's the current system. So that's the easiest to implement. With regards to a sales tax, that would be the most complicated to implement because you're introducing a new sales tax. And our POS systems, none of them have sales tax in there. You have to remember every entity, whether you're a large business or a small business, mom and pop, they're going to have to add whatever that sales tax is. Nobody is set up for that at all. And all you have are claims on, so think about how many businesses actually declare total sales receipts to the government. That's another challenge. So you're going to have a lot of little areas of non-compliance and areas of compliance, I would assume, for those businesses who report back to Revenue Tax on their collections on total sales for GRT. Because I think that's always been a big question, is whether or not those are real numbers and how much of they actually are collecting. But GRT is the easiest to implement, but we all agree that GRT is going to affect everyone in a bigger way. And also the businesses pay GRT, right, rather than pass it along to the consumer, even though there is a pass along eventually, it costs more than the GRT increase alone. But with sales tax, definitely it's more complicated, and I really don't think you can implement that within not even a year to two. There's a lot of education, there's a lot of systems to put in place. There are things, again, to consider with the exemptions. And then to answer the question, or to talk about what Carlos was talking about, we did talk to a tax advisor about whether or not businesses can choose to either pay a higher GRT or do the sales tax. There are ways to do it. Again, all of that will take time, and whether or not the government can go through that process to identify which businesses should have that exemption and which businesses shouldn't, and just implement a sales tax.
But I think just to kind of, if I could quickly, if you ask the business community when should raising taxes be implemented, take your time.
Okay, well, we're going to go to Jay to answer, because let's just keep in mind, I understand where Ms. Rhodes coming from. We're not asking anybody right now, what are your exemption, who's going to be exempted. It's what the bill is presented.
No, I'm just talking about the
But
matter.
Mrs. Rhodes, just understand, okay? What you're posing is, for me, you're making us look at a circle that doesn't exist. Okay, so just hold on and relax.
It does exist.
Mr. J. And if you can turn off the mic, please. Thank you. Jay.
Sorry, thank you.
And
I
then
think
Senator Snickers will be asking the next questions.
I think to kind of close that circle and close that loop, it's let's take an example. This bill will be implemented whenever this body actually chooses it to be implemented. So if we look at an April 1st, rev and tax should have, and that information is where the bill is implemented, sales tax should be collected April 1st. Then rev and tax has enough time, because in likes of BPT, what would likely happen is that filing would actually happen the following month, whether it's the 15th or 20th of whatever rev and tax actually does ask for as far as a submission and payment of this sales tax that would be collected, to kind of go through and be able to do it. Ideally, we can follow it on the current BPT process, use some of the same process and procedures, correct, John? To be able to do that. So I think rev and tax will do what they need to do to be able to implement it on the legislature's timeline. The issue will come about with sales tax versus BPT, where in essence, if you look at a BPT, I do have to disagree with Ms. Rhodes, because if you look at a retail shop, every single item would have to be changed and add 2% to each one of those items. With a sales tax, you can actually add it on at the end of the transaction. Most cash registers these days have that programmable taxable option on your subtotal of whatever you do on there. The difficulty with the sales taxes, however, is when you start taking a look at what's exempt from sales tax and what's not exempt from sales tax, because then that retail operation will then have to go to every product and say, is this exempt, is this sales taxable, is this non-taxable? So again, there's variations as to when we do it, but in order to close that loop, I think what we're saying is, if you do look at it hypothetically, implementing this, that April 1st sales tax should be collected, that money should be collected by Revenue and Taxation within 45 days, and then immediately transmitted to Department of Administration.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rojas, for that. Unfortunately, this body can only we can only write the laws and vote on them. It really is incumbent upon, and Ms. Rhodes actually brought it up. We have this Airbnb tax that was passed by this body 3 years ago, and it still has not been implemented. There was also a cigarette stamp tax that Senator San Nicolas introduced, and this body passed, I think, 6 months ago. And that had an implementation date of 90 days. And we're still waiting. We're still waiting for the administration. So I respectfully disagree.
Okay, Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, my next questions are for Mr. John Camacho, and thank you for the indulgence. This is it's going to be seemingly unrelated, but it's actually related in that it has to do with when the effective date for this act might actually be necessary. We're talking about multiple fiscal years of budget challenges that we're going to need to address, and I wanted to kind of focus first on fiscal year 2018. And have a discussion about something that was brought up in multiple testimonies with respect to property tax. And so, Mr. Camacho, I understand that property tax collections have been done already for in calendar year 2018, but is that for tax year 2018?
No, it's for tax year 2017.
So as of today, we have not had any 2018 property tax collections, and that's the way the law is written.
Yes, that's where, yes.
Could you walk us through how the law is written with respect to when property taxes are assessed and when they are collected?
Basically, properties are assessed basically on the first Monday of March. For example, this first Monday of March, so we're looking at 2018 this year. Then basically, you look at all the properties and you look at their values, and based on the values, they're actually basically assessed on that day. Basically, going forward, basically, in order for us to basically do the billings for 2018, it has to be basically given to the public and also at the same time certified by the Board of Equalization by October 31st to make it valid. Once it's valid, then starting November, December, they are actually mailed out. This is a, fast process.
Mailed out when? I didn't catch that.
Starting end of November, early December, we start mailing out those billings. And then the first installment is due February 20, and then the second installment is due on April 20.
So the certification for the 2018 the assessment for the 28 property taxes are in March of this year.
Yes.
First Monday of March,
yes.
Which I think just passed already. And
yes.
so the certification happens by October 31st, and they're mailed out subsequent to that, and then they're paid usually in the calendar year to come. The actual revenue is received.
Normally, since let's say for example, we mailed out the 17 already, so right. We're already realizing, most of the taxes. I think some of them are paying even the second installment. So yet it's not due until April. So that's how it works. It's a process.
The assessment that was done just this recent first Monday in March, was that for 2018?
It should be 2018, yes.
So, Mr. Camacho, what if we were to accelerate when the 2018 property taxes were to be paid and have them paid perhaps in June or August of this current calendar year? Would that be, since it's already been assessed, technically we're not raising a tax, we're just accelerating when the payment is due as opposed to waiting all the way until the end of the calendar year.
So basically what we're saying here is that, this assessment is based on whatever the value is on the first Monday of March. So it's basically also for the tax year of 2018, which ends on December. That's why it's built that way, that the taxes are due. First installment is due on February 20, first installment. So speeding up the process, it's something that people are going to be paying their taxes that have not been exhausted for that calendar year. That's what I'm trying to say. That's why there's a process. But if a law is written and it passes, then we follow it.
If we were to accelerate the payment of property taxes, and instead of waiting until the certification in October and the mailing out and the eventual collections, if we were to accelerate the payment of those taxes to be before the end of this fiscal year, and hopefully sooner rather than later, that is something that basically will just be an administrative function of the department at this point.
And once those statutes are amended and become law, we will follow those statutes.
Okay, and I wanted to raise that, Mr. Chairman, because in the course of all of the proceedings that we've had that have led to the introduction of these bills, a $67 million shortfall for FY 2018 was what was discussed. The government has mentioned through BBMR that $37 million could be addressed through cuts and austerity, leaving a $30 million balance for shortfall. If we were to accelerate the property tax payments and receive what's already been assessed, but receive the payments sooner, the amounts that we're looking at based on the information that was provided to us by the fiscal team would be $29.51 million. So I just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. Chairman, as we have these discussions. Perhaps since it's in the public hearing, if we entertain the bill, it could be considered as an amendment, but we may want to just consider, instead of raising people's taxes, just accelerating when the taxes assessed for 2018 are to be paid. That should cover us into, in conjunction with the cuts that have been spoken about, the 37 million in cuts, that should cover us for FY 2018, which would give us flexibility on the enactment, the date of enactment for this bill, if we were to use it as an option for FY 2019. So I thank the administration for their information.
Thank you. Senator Esteves, author of Bill 249.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to make this quick. Just to highlight a couple of points in the presentation, Mr. Camacho, you've taken into account the increase in the threshold for EITC for FY 2018, correct? Or the 2018 tax year?
I'm sorry, can you, is that for EITC?
For EITC, correct.
No, I haven't taken any, this is just based on tax cut rate. I did not take the EITC credits certain families get, plus all the other benefits. I didn't take that in consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Camacho. Sorry, Mr. Camacho. Mr. Chairman, I would like to just enter into the record. I know I've put these statistics out, but I think it's very relevant when we're talking about a sales tax and the government's ability to recoup money that it gives out. And again, to enter into the record, we've had different numbers, estimated workforce of about 63,000, estimates of about 56,000 currently within Guam. That's about 1/3 of the population. If you look at our population, the workforce, 1/3 of the workforce, the tax filers, only 1/3 of that portion, so 1/3 of the population comprises the workforce. 1/3 of that, approximately 1/3 of that, actually don't pay or receive money via EITC. And so there's a couple ways to look at this. When you look at, and we can use the 2018 tax table coming up, if an individual with one child, which makes up a large demographic of the island and the workforce, just one child, making $15.05 an hour working full-time, gets back 48 cents paid by the government of Guam to them. So anybody making less than $15.05 an hour, and this does not include additional child tax credit, this is just income liability taxed at 12% on the new rates and EITC. So that's the highest threshold. So anybody making less than $15.05 an hour is actually in fact getting money from the government of Guam. Primarily that 2/3 of the workforce that actually pay income taxes. So it's more than just the 0% threshold for tax liability. It's also EITC, in which that Guam actually pays out of pocket. So what I wanted to enter that into the record, because I think it's very important, because a consumption tax is probably the only viable way that the government can actually recover some of that money lost through income tax, because on paper it looks great, over 200 million in income taxes, but the reality is that that money just goes right back out to the tune of at least 125 million, so about 50% of the income tax that we expect to get in. So I just wanted to enter some of that information into the record, Mr. Chairman, for the committee to evaluate and verify if need be. I have a question for Mr. Camacho, Rev and Tax, and this is in regards to Bill 248. In Bill 248, if you look at the proposed Section 26704 on page 2, line 13, Rules and Regulation, the Department of Revenue and Taxation shall promulgate rules and regulations to implement this article within 30 days of enactment, which basically says if 248 is adopted, that you will have to promulgate, which means in layman's to create rules and to adopt them. Is that something you believe that you would be able to do in your department?
I certainly can work on it and 30 days. And one of the reasons why I wanted to make it easier for this bill is that I basically adopted the provisions for BPT that addresses a lot of these things, which what you did on Bill 249, which you look at all those provisions that you have. So I don't have to come up with those provisions.
Correct.
I just adopted it.
But does this mean you're immune to the AAA process? Because if the promulgation of rules coming through, so do you think having to go through the AAA process, even though the rules already exist, or you're just adopting it from statute? You think the AAA process will be complete within 30 days?
I think it's just a process for that. I don't think we can do it in 30 days if we're going to go through the AAA process.
So, but in fact, though, if the rules are being promulgated by Department of Revenue and Taxation or with any agencies as allowed by law, we'll have to go through the AAA process, as opposed to if the rules and how it's applied are applied in statute, then you don't need the AAA process. So do you believe that you'd be able to implement, you still believe you'd be able to implement 248 or 249 faster?
But Senator, my proposed amendment for this bill basically is to exclude the rules and regulations and just replace that, which means that we don't have to go through that process. That's my recommendation. The general provisions does provide the Department of Revenue and Taxation to provide rules and regulations if needed. So if we pass this thing and we move forward, if needed, we can work on the rules and regulations. That's the reason why I basically say, delete this Section 26704 rules and regulation and replace it by the general provisions, which allows the Department of Revenue and Taxation to actually provide rules and regulations if needed.
So your amendment was to provide and adopt, or actually adopt the general provisions of revenue and taxation in statute, correct?
Yes, to just copy it like most of the other articles of Chapter 26, which deals with, for example, liquid fuel, tobacco and alcohol, and even occupancy tax. I believe they all try to blend into the provisions of the BPT.
I understand. Yes. So which specific section or which specific article under Chapter 26 were you referring to the adoption? Because if when you understand how complicated it is. There are the general provision aspects of Chapter 26, but then you have to actually pull pieces from other articles. So are you proposing we just adopt any and all provisions available in Chapter 26?
Like I think some of the articles that if not mistaken, I've adopted that provision. So we're adopting basically the entire provisions of the general provisions of the BPT, which is Chapter 26, Article 1, to apply also to Article 7, which is what this bill is all about. In other words, so in addition to what is in the bill or what's in the bill, we're also going to adopt the Article 1 of Chapter 26, which is, if I may just look at the Article 1, general provisions, starts with all the definitions, administration, collections, all the way down. It defines, the returns, and that's why I wanted to amend it, the returns, so you'll be part of it, so that when, people collect the sales tax, then they can actually file it on the 20th of every month. And even anything that deals with sales tax, if there's any hearing or any dispute, any adjustments, any reviews, they're all already situated here on Article 1.
Minus some
which you actually did yours also, yes.
And that's the only one what I want to highlight, right? It's, when we're creating law, it's a lot simpler than just citing an entire chapter or an entire article to make a bill whole. Thank you, Mr. Camacho. Final question for Mr. Rojas. In your professional belief, you think it would be that difficult to exempt items under the provisions of exemptions, articles exempted from a sales tax with reference to Bill 249?
In my professional opinion, yes. Just essentially trying to be able to get one bill through this body has been tough in the past couple of weeks.
I understand, but just asking though, just a general statement to your question. You think it'd be very difficult for businesses to make the determination whether something's a prescription medicine or not, whether it's a food item or not, or whether it's a baby item under the exemptions or not? You think that would take a long time to implement?
From a business perspective, some of those businesses could have upwards of 500,000 products that are out there. And they'd have to go through one by one. And I think that's one of the issues that they had with the BPT as well, is they'd have to incorporate the prices into each one of those products by raising them up that 2%.
Understand, but you said it yourself, it was at the point of sale, correct?
Correct, but at the point of sale, you also have to decide whether or not that item would be taxable or non-taxable. And if you have a store, for instance, with 500,000 items, or even 1,000 items with a POS system and a UPS and a UPC scanner, then you're going to have to go through and say that this UPC is taxable, this UPC is not. So that's why it is going to have a little bit of that difficulty with the sales tax.
You had something
I'm sorry, with exemptions.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes.
Yeah, the taxes aren't, unless it's a sales tax, is put out at the point of sale system. It's already built in the system.
Yes.
So there's a lot of work that's done in advance, so the consumer, it'll be seamless to the consumer, right?
Yes.
But the question is, can we implement all of this in time? Think about how many businesses you go to actually have a real POS system. We
Yes.
have a lot of businesses on Guam that do not have POS systems still. And then the other thing is, even with the POS system, you have to allow enough time for all those businesses. There's only 2 suppliers on Guam who can go in and make those changes. Businesses can't essentially just go in and make whatever changes they want. They have to pay for that service change and that program change. So it's also, it's all embedded into the systems, and there are manual systems as well. You have to also remember, so many businesses between contractors, hoteliers, airlines, everybody has contracts also that are in place outside of systems. There are paper contracts for sales that have to be impacted. And a lot of businesses are sometimes a year, sometimes 3 years out on those proposals. We are having a build-up forum right now, and a lot of those businesses, they have contracts in place or bids on proposals for set prices already. So you're going to impact everything going forward, whether it's business privilege tax or sales tax. So it's not, we're oversimplifying something that is very, very difficult to process and maneuver when you only have so many suppliers on Guam that provide that service.
Now with specifically to Bill 249, so we're all on the same page. It only applies to retail. So a business, yes, maybe if they purchase locally through retail sales, other than that, they would pay maybe the additional 2%, but they're subject to the 4% use tax on importing items for construction. But there are exemptions. If you look within the exemptions, at least for government of Guam, under federal projects, we could look at potentially exemptions there to prevent contracts or inflation. But in terms of the large projects that we see going on, what the difference is, if I go purchase a broom at a mom and pop store, I'm paying the sales tax. If I'm ordering it in bulk, I'm paying the use tax plus the 2% sales tax, but there are exemptions to wholesale. So I'm only paying on retail. The exemptions for wholesale still exist. They don't pay the GRT. They don't pay the sales tax under 249. And services are exempt from the sales tax. It only applies to retailers. And that's to make it as close to a pure 2% increase at point of sale to the consumer as we can get while reducing inflation. So I'm hoping that the measures in 249 alleviate kind of that burden and potential impact with pending contracts, and I hope to continue working with you. Yes, Mr. Ross.
Sorry, I just wanted to kind of point out that Ms. Rhodes just basically supported my argument that, you know, an implementation of a flat 2% across the board is going to be easier than anyone with exemptions. So once we start adding the exemptions is when we have to go through this process at the cash registers with each one of these stores to be able to say, hey, this would be exempt, this would be non-exempt.
I understand.
You know,
and I just want to be very...
Post-transaction, add that 2%.
Thank you. And I just want to be very clear, the intent of 249, and I want the record to reflect this, the intent of 249 was not to provide an immediate cash solution for the government of Guam. Let me be very, very clear to that. That's why the exemptions are in place, to provide a cash infusion. And I want the record to be very clear that 249 will not generate as much as a general sales tax across the board, which is basically a BPT across the board by another name. So while I do understand it is easier to implement, considering at least my legislative intent for this bill as a long-term solution and transition with a revenue stream to the government that's not a detriment to the business community and the people. That I think it's more important to do things right as opposed to do things easy. And I apologize that this is not going to be the solution for the immediate crisis that we're in, but I do hope to work with the business community and the administration to try to streamline its applications as intact of the bill as we can get. So thank you. Ms. Rhodes, did you have something you wanted to add before?
Yeah, I just want to say, please don't take what I say for one thing and apply it to everything. The POS system and adding a 2% sales tax, yeah, sure, you can do that, right? You could charge 2%. But it is a very complicated matter considering, again, Guam has been duty-free. We have not had a sales tax. So it is not an easy thing. We are going to have a lot of other challenges that come along with that. And yes, some people may say it's time, it's ready, but it's not in addition to paying business privilege tax. We are only wanting to have the discussion if it's going to replace it, and it's not a short-term solution. You're right. It's not going to solve the problems, especially if you have all these exemptions. You're not going to have as much money as you would have thought of. But we have to look at a comprehensive set of solutions, and that is why I implored all of the senators at the beginning is we take the different versions of all the bills and really discuss the ramifications they all have. But we want to create, at least give caution about looking at any kind of a sales tax, because it changes the way Guam has been promoted and really marketed as a destination for our visitors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you all for patiently waiting for me to share my questions. I want to thank Mr. Camacho. I heard you on the radio last week provide bits and pieces of your presentation, and I tried my best to articulate that with my colleagues last week during the Committee of the Whole. And I was, on a positive note, we were short one vote, we get an amendment, but my question really is, just hearing all the discussion here with regards to a sales tax, if we remove the exemptions or we proceed without exemptions, isn't this basically the same thing as a BPT adjustment? Anyone who can answer that, because
if anybody feels comfortable, I just want to make sure that we all understand that, number one, the difference between a sales tax and a BPT. Sales tax gives exemptions mandated by federal law. BPT does not allow any exemptions. So, but you can answer it, Jay or Ms. Rhodes, and anybody else.
Aside from, because we're really trying our best to, I'm trying to grasp that, if we proceed the best way to address or realize the revenues we need for this government is clearly outlined or clearly being made here that, at least I'm hearing, is to proceed without any exemptions. And I'm just wondering, absent the fact of being more transparent and all that, it just seems like it's basically a BPT adjustment.
In essence, it's a tax on a transaction, which of course would be both a business privilege tax as well as a sales tax. The difference is also whether or not it would be visible or hidden. Okay, take it to another level, and you're actually talking about, again, as Mr. Camacho had actually said earlier, you're talking about implementing a sales tax, which would supersede what is in the QCs, because QCs actually are already exempt from business privilege tax. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility as a body to be able to kind of maneuver what a sales tax would be versus with what a business privilege tax would be. Call it what you will, 2% without exemptions and immediately would essentially be a visible business privilege tax in essence, so that we can actually look at that transition, as I said, to get ourselves to a full sales tax, and then eventually, in working with the chamber, is what they said, convert the business privilege tax into a sales tax to go from there. So I think that's where I was going with that phased approach to take us through these steps, you know, easy, one by one. You know, I think Senator Lee, with what she said in her last statement, and I had nothing to say because I don't think it was a question, I think if she was concerned about the implementation of this, then she probably should have voted for the other bill that was just to increase the BPT, and then we can work all of this out later. But you know, again, what we're looking at is we're looking at trying to one, solve the issues that we're currently having with the fiscal year. Two, trying to be able to find a revenue source that would be secure, collectible, and creditable. And then three, find a way that we can actually work it out. And that's that third phase, which is where I say we really need to get everyone's heads together to be able to say, let's exempt this, let's look at this exemption, this should be exempt versus this, because everyone's going to have an opinion as to what should be exempt and what should not. And then we also need to address the duty-free situation. You know, who would be a duty-free store? How would they opt in? How would they opt out? How would they be exempt? And with the visitors that do come in, does that actually allow us to give them a rebate immediately? Does it give us, do we give them their money back at the airport when they leave? If we do it for only visitors, are we looking at USA passport holders or Japan passport holders or Korea passport holders? So again, all of those things kind of do need to be figured out, especially when we're starting to consider the duty-free side of things. So it is a complicated issue, and the easiest thing for us to do to implement this fast, collect the money fast, was to be able to look at BPT, since that's not an option because the body voted it down. Next option could be the visible BPT. You know, and that essentially will turn into the sales tax option, which will turn into the sales tax option with exemptions. And then again, further down the line, we can turn it into that sales tax where the BPT converts from BPT to sales tax when we're able to do it with the BPT bonds that are outstanding.
I appreciate that response, because I'm reading the Chamber's comments, and it seems like they're not really against this. It's just looking at the, I guess, the methodology or how it's applied. Or
the timing.
Timing. Thank you. I also want to, Mr. Camacho, I know account receivables were brought up earlier, and I know it's always being brought up, but I'm not sure the question's ever been answered. These accounts, are many of them at least attached to some sort of payment plan? At least to say that it's being collected, because I've never heard any of this being just, it just sounds like it's $90 million out there and no one's doing anything about it, but at least for the record, you can at least make it very clear that these accounts have some sort of payment plan attached to it.
Yes, there's quite a number of them that have a payment plan, and there's so many different stages on or categories of accounts receivable. You know, a big chunk of them may be stuck in bankruptcy in court, and we can't do anything. That's a big chunk of money. We can't do anything because it's in bankruptcy, in other words. Or another thing would be a lot of these people have gone. You know, they're off island. We can't get all of them. And then, you know, and also there's a lot of other receivables that are basically transient. In other words, they're going from one state to another. So the bottom line is basically that we do have a plan. We do aggressively collect. Like I mentioned, you know, and I'll mention it again, we've been working with taxpayers individually. We collected $2 million in one taxpayer one time. We've been working with the taxpayers for some time. And we're very active. I mean, you know, even our staff, they work at night, you know, sometimes to call taxpayers to collect. So it really depends on where these receivables are. In other words, and I know when people talk about receivables, $90 million, $100 million, but one thing we all remember, why do we have these receivables in the first place? It's because taxpayers can't make the payment, in other words. They don't have the financial money to do it, in other words. We basically have so many plans that we've been doing, businesses, before they actually renew their business license. You know what we do? We don't renew their business license. We send them to collection branch. Pay up or sign a payment plan. We've been doing this for many years already. So you can know that the business out there also are hurting. It's something that either we say, hey, we close your business. How are you going to close the business? How about the economy? Why close down a business because they can't pay it? And how does the economy work? How are you going to expect to lay off people that are working? So we are working, we are collecting, and that's the thing about when people say, hey, we have a big chunk of receivable out there, but the first thing you ask is, why is it there? Because people don't have the money to pay right away. But people go on payment plans. We also go pay. We even go to the problem where we actually levy their checks. We go to employers to levy these things, but it takes time. In other words,
Mr. Camacho, I purposely asked that question because I wanted to give you the chance, that opportunity to make it clear to our public that revenue tax is working to collect those accounts receivable, and to know that there are payment plans that are in place to assist the taxpayer. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Obviously, when we go to the next filing year, it compounds. So yes, you may be bringing it down from 100 million to 90, but obviously there's a compounding effect because circumstances have changed. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to bring that up because I heard that many times, and I just want to give Urban Tax that opportunity to provide that information and make it clear to our public that there is collections in place. And I think, Mr. Chair, you know that for sure, your expertise. My last question, Mr. Chair, I appreciate Ms. Rhodes bringing up this question because being careful and I support the idea of moving to a sales tax, but the fact that Mr. Rojas, the fact that all of the information you're bringing up and understanding that the BPT had a sunset provision and we were juggling dates. I tried many amendments to see what date can work. I even went with a date that I thought many would agree with, and it still didn't pass. Sales tax, however, in these two bills don't have a sunset provision. And I think that makes it very clear that once this is done, it's done. And I appreciate the testimony being provided here as we move through this, and knowing, I'm trying to understand how fast we can move with it. We'll work with the chairman and how fast that could happen. But again, you guys heard my statements. I thank the administration for providing this since February 26th. Hopefully this could be reported out there clearly, a fiscal realignment plan that is required by statute. I thank you for that information. It makes it very clear how this government, given this proposed plan to this body, should move forward to realign. I hope that the body will move sooner with that realignment plan, and given some of the recommendations provided here by this panel here, and see how that can fit into this realignment plan, so that way we can move forward. And I thank the administration for providing that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, we ran out of names on the list. There's nobody else here to testify on the bills of Bill 248 and 249. That being said, the committee will continue to receive testimonies. That ends the hearing on the two bills. And the committee will continue to receive testimonies for the next few days, actually just until tomorrow, just in case we are called in any special session on either of the bills. Please address your written testimony to the Committee on Education, Finance, and Taxation and submit it via email to Senator Joe S. San Agustin at gmail.com. My office is located at Rand Care Building, Second floor, Suite 3, 761 South Marine Corps Drive, Tumuning, Guam. Jesus Masi for your attendance and participating in today's hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. It is now 12:43 and we will be going into session at 1 p.m. Thank you.